and controls and CTE and Alzheimer's disease, the next question is, can we do this in the blood and can we do this in living people? And we aren't there yet with those answers.
But the need for a diagnosis in the living is motivating companies such as Quanterix in Lexington, Massachusetts, to work faster on technology that could diagnose concussions and CTE in as few as 30 minutes. Kevin Rosovsky is the CEO.
It's like a high-powered microscope. And so by doing that, we can see little biomarkers that you couldn't see before in the blood.
Quanterix received a grant from the NFL and just went public. Since then, its stock is up more than 40%. The company sells a machine called Simoa for $175,000 to other biotechs, hospitals, and researchers.
And for the first time in history, we're able to see brain health in blood, and that's a major breakthrough, and that's leading to less invasive testing, and we've already been able to see evidence of concussions, and there's the beginning evidence of being able to see the accumulated effect of concussions.
Quanterix is also trying to detect Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, and ALS. Rosovsky says he thinks diagnosing concussions will be easier than diagnosing CTE.
Diagnosing CT in the living probably is a couple years away. We're real excited to see the progress, but reducing some of that work into actual tests in a laboratory takes time. There's regulatory approvals. There's a lot of red tape that you have to go through.
Also in this race to diagnose CTE in the blood are Athlon Medical and Exosome Sciences. And New York's Mount Sinai Hospital is scanning for the disease in the living. But it's just one step in a series of questions for those with serious head trauma. There's still no cure for CTE.
Even if we had a great idea for a treatment, there's no way to test whether it's effective or not. So that's the enormous advance that we'll get if we can develop a biomarker for this disease.
In Boston, Ann Mostu, Bloomberg News.
Wine is a $300 billion global industry where one person's opinion can make fortunes or break them. That's because of this man, Robert Parker, and his newsletter, The Wine Advocate. For 3 decades, he dominated as the world's most influential wine critic. Now Parker's protege is building an empire of his own. Antonio Galloni runs Venice.
Antonio, tell me, what are you trying to build at Venice?
Well, at Venice, we started with the idea in 2013 of building a world-class platform. We have a database of about 250,000 professionally written reviews. On Delectable, we have 7 million user reviews. Through Delectable, we also have a partnership with Whole Foods and several other partnerships that we can't announce just yet. And when you put that all together, what we have is something that no other company in our space can even come close to.
Do you think of yourself as the next Parker?
Not at all.
Why?
Because Steve Jobs said you can't live your life trying to be somebody else. So he's one of my biggest influences, and I've never wanted to be a replica of somebody else because a replica is never as good as the original. Bob is a genius, fantastic, one of a kind. We're going to be something completely different, and I have no desire to be some version of somebody else.
Different in what way?
Every decision that I've made at this company is completely anathemic to what Bob did with his company. I want our writers to be partners. All of my senior people are locked into the company. They all have equity or they have a path to equity based on business results. That's something that we never had at Parker. Our benefits are world-class, and everything that we've done at Venice is completely different from that model. When Steve Tanzer, who is the most experienced active wine critic in America, wants to work with us, that says something. When Alessandro Masnaghetti, who's the best cartographer of vineyards, wants to work with us, that says something. When Neil Martin, who's a superstar wine critic with enormous experience in Bordeaux and Burgundy and the former lead critic at The Advocate, wants to come and be part of our team, that says something.
You make it sound like The Wine Advocate was a disaster as a company and a miserable experience as an employee.
No, it was great because I got to work with Bob Parker when he was at his prime, you know, and Bob was like a second father to me, and we talked on the phone all the time, and he gave me great advice.
Can anyone's palate dominate the wine criticism business the way Parker's did? And should anyone's palate dominate it the way his did?
I just think the world is very different today. You know, it's just a totally different world. It's probably not healthy to have a single person dominating the world.
It's not even wine criticism, it's the wine industry.
Yeah, that's probably not the healthiest thing in the world. But I think that there's just such an opportunity right now with social media and technology to reach such a massive number of people that I think it's possible that 1 or 2 people will actually have more influence than Bob Parker did, because they will, again, this goes back to your first question, not trying to be a version of somebody else. You see this in sports all the time. It's like, oh, well, nobody will ever beat this record. And then somebody comes along, you know, it's like tennis, Pete Sampras. Nobody's ever going to win as many Grand Slams. Now you have 2 guys who are ahead of that and 1 knocking on the door. And so I think a lot like that.
You're a former investment banker. How does that inform and influence what you're doing and what you've done?
My generation has had to deal with a lot more challenges. That's why I think we're actually much better poised for the future. My first job in finance, the first thing that happened was long-term capital, 1998. Then the tech bubble melted down. Then there was a mutual fund trading scandal. You know, that was all like within about 5 or 6 years. And these are the things that I had to deal with as a young executive. My peers who were 20 years older didn't know how to manage in crisis. They'd only seen Black Monday. They'd just been in a big bull market. It's very different. So I'm very lucky. People of my generation or a little bit younger have actually had to deal with a lot more crises. I think that's actually good for learning how to cope with challenges in business.
From the outside, it kind of looks like you're trying to demolish the house that Parker built, right? You left The Wine Advocate.
Yeah.
You merged with one of his chief rivals.
Yeah.
And you just hired his successor, Neil Martin.
Mm-hmm.
So are you?
I think what that says is that all the best people want to work at our company, and that's really what we strive to create starting in 2013. We wanted to create a world-class company that would attract the best-in-class talent, and not just on the content side, on the technology side, on the digital side, our office, and at every level, what we're trying to, we only hire superstars, and we're looking for those superstars.
In the world of professional wrestling, there's something called a swerve.
Hulk Hogan has betrayed WCW!
Some examples. These tag team partners are called babyfaces, or the good guys. Then one of them swerves when he super kicks his tag team partner in the head, quickly assuming the role of the bad guy, or what the wrestling world calls the heel.
Are you kidding? What a despicable act that was!
Or a match is almost lost when, what's that? The superstar wrestler appears out of nowhere sprinting down the aisle to save the match.
That's the Warriors music! It's the Ultimate Warrior!
That's a swerve. So it should go as no surprise that World Wrestling Entertainment, known as the WWE, the most popular brand of sports entertainment in the world, is prepared for any swerves that come their way. So here's the story of how the WWE learned to see the swerve coming. So I spoke to Bloomberg reporters Felix Gillette.
I'm a writer for Bloomberg News for the global business team.
And Kim Basine.
And I'm the U.S. luxury reporter at Bloomberg.
To find out exactly how the WWE is positioning itself for an all-out global invasion, which starts with a massive change to their lucrative pay-per-view model.
WWE basically pioneered the pay-per-view model on cable. I remember as a kid, when the pay-per-view events came up, all of our friends would scramble around and try and get one of the parents to pay for it.
But in 2014, they took a huge risk.
They saw a little bit sooner than some of the other entertainment brands that where this whole thing was moving was away from cable and satellite television and towards on-demand streaming video apps. They made this risky decision, in essence, cannibalizing that pay-per-view model, which they had essentially built.
And after some early turbulence, it's working. Roughly 1.5 million people are paying $9.99 a month for the WWE app, making it the 5th most popular streaming OTT service. This adapt-or-die approach is in the WWE's DNA. Over the past 30 years, the company always seems to think 2 steps ahead. In the early 90s,
WWE was at its most threatened when Ted Turner took them on with WCW,
which stands for World Championship Wrestling. And back then, the WCW was winning the ratings war. So in order to compete with them,
WWE had changed its product from a family-friendly kind of cartoonish style to this really raw. That's why they called their show Raw. It was this raw style of wrestling.
With violent, outrageous, reality-inspired plot lines and aggressive personas.
From a 16-foot ladder!
And they won that fight against Ted Turner. And they bought WCW.
The early 2000s ushered in an era of testosterone-driven programming aimed at the red-blooded American male.
Bra and panties matches, and people smash each other over their head with like barbed wire bats and things like that.
Until 2015, when WWE fans started a hashtag #GiveDivas a Chance. Since then, WWE has hired 40 more female wrestlers, and that growing cast of female characters was part of a much larger plan.
They started to try to appeal to a broader set of people.
Let's attract more female fans. And after we've attracted more female fans, let's attract more international fans. They're broadening their base, and they're doing that in large part to make it more advertising friendly.
And not just friendly to advertisers.
They're trying to build up their fan base in China. They're trying to build up their fan base in Europe. They, already have a pretty good fan base in India.
India is a place where they already have an established wrestling culture.
Because of the gigantic Indian wrestler, the Great Khali. But there's still a lot of work to do. While the WWE set a revenue record in 2017, only 30% of it is coming from an overseas audience. And there's one person whose responsibility is to grow that number.
The buck eventually stops at Vince McMahon, no matter what's happening within WWE.
Yeah, he's a very controlling guy, and it's a very, very, very tightly scripted company.
And that goes all the way down the board to big stars' entrance music. And their outfits and things like that.
So with a CEO like McMahon always planning 2 moves ahead and an aggressive push into multiple international markets, a big issue is money.
It's hard to do all those things simultaneously without committing a huge amount of capital to it.
And that's where the WWE becomes an attractive company for buyers.
Potentially, one thing that could happen with WWE is they could benefit by being acquired by a bigger technology or telecom company, an Amazon or Facebook or a 21st Century Fox.
So with a market cap of $2.8 billion, the advantage of owning 100% of their own content, and a rapid consolidation spreading throughout the entertainment industry, it looks like the WWE is well positioned, even if there are swerves.
Our world is changing. Every day, it changes a little faster. Some changes are too small to see. Others, too big to handle. Sometimes, change feels slow. So slow, we don't even notice. Other times, it happens all at once, and we can't keep up. For our climate, change means many things. And between too small to see and too big to handle, there is a whole world of difference. The clock is ticking. This is Bloomberg Green.
Saving the seas. This week, the deep-sea diver who stopped writing the ocean's obituary to find a solution. Enric Sala tells us why the next 10 years matter most. And globalization needs to get greener. Shipping accounts for nearly an eighth of all transport emissions. How can the industry clean up its act? Plus, protecting coastlines comes at a huge environmental cost. But one Israeli startup found a way to keep the sea out and the animals in. From London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green. After more than a decade of studying the ocean as an academic, Enric Sala realized he was writing the ocean's obituary. He quit his job and became a full-time conservationist. As an in-house explorer for National Geographic, he's clocked more than 5,000 open water dives. He's also founded Pristine Seas, a project that combines exploration, research, and media to lobby countries to protect their oceans. To date, it has helped create marine reserves equivalent to half the size of Canada. I spoke to him about his mission and why it's so urgent.
The state of the world's oceans is really bad. We have lost 90% of the large fish in the ocean. Sharks, groupers, cod, tuna. More than half of the fish stocks are overfished, which means that we are taking them out of the water faster than they can reproduce. More than half of the ocean is affected by industrial fishing, and global warming is killing coral reefs all around the world. The ocean is in a trajectory of decline.
Can you just visualize for our viewers who never get to see the kind of things you are able to see, what an ocean and healthy ecosystem looks like versus one that's next to a bustling economic and industrialized area?
Coral reefs in the United States, in the Florida Keys, are down to only 2% of what they used to be. Before, 80 to 90% of the bottom on a coral reef in the Caribbean was covered by live coral. Now, Florida Keys have only 2%. The average in the Caribbean is about 5% of the bottom covered by live coral. The rest is covered by slime and seaweed. And most of the fish you can see are this big. And it is very, very rare that if you jump into any place in the Caribbean at random, you see a shark. It's very, very rare. Now, let's go to Millennium Atoll, for example. An atoll that is uninhabited and fished south of the equator in the Central Pacific, belongs to the Republic of Kiribati. 2009, we conducted the first underwater expedition to these islands, and I still remember the first time. Jumped over the side of the boat, and as soon as the bubbles cleared, I was surrounded by 15 gray reef sharks. After a couple minutes, the sharks decided that we were boring, and they went back to do their thing. And you look down, 90% of the seafloor is covered by thriving coral, and it's full of fish, and a sea turtle comes by. Now, this abundance that we rarely see anywhere except in well-managed marine reserves. This is what the ocean used to be like, and this is what we have learned from going to these pristine places.
And you write in your book that you're writing the obituary of ocean life. What's the cure?
The cure is doing less harm. Basically, there are three things that we are doing to the ocean. One is we are taking fish out of the water faster than they can reproduce. Two, we are turning the ocean warmer and more acidic because of man-made climate change. And three, we are throwing in everything that we don't want, our waste and our plastic. We need basically to reverse these trends.
Does this mean that a lot of this falls to governments and their policies?
That's a big part of it, because it is governments that regulate fishing and mineral extraction and oil extraction. It It is governments that have the legal authority to create large marine reserves in the ocean. But also, local communities have an important role to play because some of the most successful protected areas in the ocean are community-led and community-managed marine reserves. So when the fish come back, the divers come in. And that creates huge economic opportunities through ecotourism. These areas that are managed by communities are very successful because the communities have a vested interest in having as many fish as possible inside them so they can enjoy the benefits.
What from the pandemic has changed your view when it comes to protection of the environment?
Nature has given us a very strong signal of how fast it can recover if we just give it space. Everybody was fascinated by all these videos of the whales and the dolphins coming into marinas and mountain lions on the streets of Santiago in Chile, wild goats in the UK. Nature has this extraordinary ability to bounce back if we just give it space. This is why we need to protect at least 30% of the planet by 2030.
How do healthy marine ecosystems help in the fight against climate change, though?
Most people see the ocean as a victim of climate change, but the ocean can also be a solution because we know that the more life that is in the ocean, like big fish and big whales, the more these organisms help to make the ocean productive and absorb more CO2. The kelp forest, seagrass beds, all of these are important ecosystems in the ocean that are similar to the forest on the land that capture a lot of our carbon pollutions.
What are you most excited about in your field?
We have 10 years to fix this problem. Global fisheries catch is going down, stocks are collapsing. Business as usual means that by 2050, 90% of the coral reefs are gone, that most commercial fisheries have collapsed. That affects food security, that affects migration of people. We have 10 years to get to peak greenhouse gas emissions and then go carbon neutral by 2050. And we have 10 years to protect at least 30% of the ocean so we can restore much of this health and productivity, not just for saving biodiversity, but also saving our life support system. We are not talking about something that is apart from us. We are not apart from nature. We are a part of nature. So these 10 years are probably the most critical in the history of humanity.
The most accurate measurements of changing oceans will come from space. While Enric Sala explores what lies beneath, a new satellite is giving us data from above.
We'll learn more about our oceans and climate change, but from space. A new satellite's been launched from California. Its mission: track the accelerating rise of sea levels.
Well, the main instruments on board include a dual-frequency radar altimeter. This is the primary instrument of the mission, and that's the one that's measuring sea surface height, significant wave height, and wind speed over the ocean. And from those measurements, we can actually have the superb measurements that we expect of sea level rise.
Data gathered from Sentinel-6 will be used alongside information from other satellites to build as complete a picture of the oceans as possible.
With a long record, we can precisely measure the acceleration. We eventually can detect new regime, tipping points. For example, if there is a runaway in the melting of Greenland or Antarctica, sea level will record this runaway change because it is an integrator of all changes that are occurring in the climate system. So we will be able to see some change, big change in the global climate.
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration expects that sea level rise will increasingly threaten U.S. coastlines. One example, the southern tip of Manhattan is expected to flood 20 to 40 times a year by 2030.
11 of the 15 largest megacities are located at the coast, and this number will double. The number of people living in coastal area will double by 2060. So, knowing how much sea level is rising at the coast and how much it will rise in the future in coastal areas is as obvious. It's obviously a major goal for human beings.
Coming up, from sails to steam to oil, the shipping industry is no stranger to change. But how will it navigate the next transition? This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern. This is Bloomberg Green. Now, for your roundup of this week's latest climate news, Jennifer Zabazaja has your Green in Brief.
Here's the climate news you need to know. Deforestation of the world's largest rainforest has hit a 12-year high. More than 4,000 square miles of the Amazon rainforest was destroyed in 2020. That's a 9.5% increase from a year earlier. Government data shows that destruction has soared since President Jair Bolsonaro took office and weakened environmental enforcement. The Amazon is home to millions of species and plants and is critical in the fight against climate change. Bitcoin is hitting all-time highs, but at what cost to the environment? The cryptocurrency is energy intensive, and there are concerns if it becomes mainstream. According to MIT, back in 2018, Bitcoin's carbon footprint was almost as big as Portugal's. Want to get better at tackling climate change? We'll hire more women. That's according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Firms with 30% or more women in top jobs tend to perform better when it comes to the environment and are more likely to set clear climate goals. Shopping online is more popular than ever now, but the price of convenience is measured in CO2, and more deliveries means more fuel burned and more packaging wasted. So what can companies do? Well, many are becoming more efficient and sourcing more clean energy for their data centers and warehouses. And England's farmers will be paid to go green after Brexit. As European subsidies are phased out, they'll get new money to encourage them to produce healthy, sustainable food. Poor farming practices are one of the leading drivers of water pollution and the loss of biodiversity. I'm Jennifer Zabazaja in New York. Anne-Marie, back to you.
The shipping industry is more than just the grease on the wheels of globalization. It's its chief enabler. 11 billion tons of goods are transported by ship each year, the biggest contributors being 2 billion tons of oil, 1 billion tons of iron ore, and 350 million tons of grain. According to the International Chamber of Shipping, 80% of Europe's imports and exports happen over the seas. And for such a vast industry, it also contributes its fair share of emissions. Shipping makes up 12% of global transport energy consumption. So how does it clean up its act? Earlier, I caught up with Bloomberg Green reporter Laura Milan about just how big of a challenge this is going to be for the industry.
One of the main issues is size. So about 90% of the world's cargo is moved by ships. So obviously changing such a huge industry is not going to be fast and it's not going to be easy. The second issue has to do with technology. So ships obviously travel for many days at sea. It's not as easy for them to refuel as it would be for a car, for example, going on a road. And the sector still hasn't found a technology that's economically viable and that's zero emissions and equivalent to the electric batteries for cars, for example.
But actions are being put in place to make the industry a bit more environmentally friendly. Walk us through those steps that they're taking.
That's it. So there's a first step that would involve using low emission fuels or biofuels that would significantly reduce the existing emissions. And then at regulatory level, when it comes to the policy and the governments, there are steps being made as well. I would say that the most significant ones come from the European Union, which started to track emissions a few years ago and is now looking to include shipping emissions in the emissions trading system. So that would significantly reduce and help calculate the emissions from the shipping industry. Now, China is taking similar steps. So at the moment, regions need to report shipping emissions to the central government. And finally, we have the International Maritime Organization with a pledge to reduce shipping emissions by 50% in 2050. Now, we must say that that pledge has been considered insufficient by environmental groups, but at least some steps are being taken.
So to get to 2050, the industry obviously is going to need to start tapping some new technologies. What new technologies are you seeing being introduced into the shipping industry?
So we have seen pilot technologies being developed for years now, but what's interesting about this current moment is that we're seeing big players invest in these technologies that are not yet economically viable, but that one day might be. So for example, we are seeing earlier this year, the world's largest agricultural commodities trader, Cargill, saying they will invest in attaching sails to their ships so they can make any technology that they run their ships on more efficient. Similarly, we have seen a spin-off of Airbus, the aeronautics company, developing a similar application with kites. We have been following also developments in hydrogen. So at the moment, hydrogen fuel seems like a good option, a possible option when it has been developed and when it becomes economically viable. And we have Vestas, for example, the world's largest turbine maker, developing some ships that will be able to run on hydrogen in the near future.
Coming up, rising sea levels means humans need to get creative when it comes to coastal defenses. But how do we protect both ourselves and the environment? One Israeli startup may have the answer. That's coming up next. This is Bloomberg Green. In London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern. This is Bloomberg Green. After water, what's the resource that humans use the most? It's concrete, 3 tons a year for every person on the planet. And engineers estimate it's used twice as much as all other building materials combined. And it comes with a huge environmental cost. Concrete, not just in cities, it's a common feature on our coastlines too. And that's taking a toll on biodiversity. But one Israeli startup has found a way of making sea defenses stronger and encouraging life to thrive.
If you take a look at concrete structures like breakwaters or seawalls, the water around them is often clear. That's not actually a good thing, because it means there's no life. Marine species are actually most abundant in coastal areas, but it's also where us humans prefer to live too. So when we build here, we drive away marine life.
The concrete in the marine world has a lot of additives, a lot of chemicals, and some of those materials are actually leaching out, and they're actually prohibiting marine life to thrive. If we keep developing without any regards to natural communities, there is a tilting point from which beyond we cannot really go back.
In the coastal city of Tel Aviv, an Israeli startup wants to revolutionize our urban coastlines. Their sea defenses are transforming lifeless man-made structures into teeming ecosystems. They do this by replacing standard concrete with their own special cement formulas.
As opposed to regular cement-based concrete, e-concrete includes certain elements that enhance the growth of marine flora and fauna of plants and animals. Our admix, which is kind of our secret sauce, is basically kind of sealing the concrete, making it less aggressive for the marine environment. That once we add it, we enable life to flourish.
In the lab, the team run tests to identify what mixes will work best for marine life.
So we take really ice cube-sized concrete slabs of different compositions, and we put larvae, 20, 30, 50. We need to have a lot of replicates. We're geeky scientists, so we have to have a lot of replication and controls. And then within a few days or just a few weeks, we can get an answer on their preference. So obviously, if they die, they have a very low tolerance to that specific concrete mix design. And if they thrive or they flourish, we can quantify that very quickly.
E-concrete says it typically sees double the biodiversity of regular grey concrete. From fish and sea caterpillars on their armour blocks to crabs on these tidal pools that sit on the shoreline.
This unit holds water during the low tide, so it's always moist, and therefore it has a very comfortable habitat for crabs and sea anemones and sea stars, etc. These pools have been here for less than 3 months, and this is already what you can see. It's covered with life. See the rock around it, which has been here for probably 10, 20, maybe even more years, only has a thin layer of green algae, and that's it.
As well as the composition of the cement mix, e-concrete designs its products specifically to the marine environment it will be deployed, to create niches for endangered species, or to develop nurseries like these oyster beds. The final part of the equation is creating complex surface textures to mimic natural rock or coral, an environment that helps anchor young organisms.
When concrete elements are being cast, the typical goal is to have a very slick surface, very, very smooth. The idea is to get the water to flow right across it. When we're designing e-concrete with a rough surface, we want to do the complete opposite. We want to slow the water when they are crossing the structure so that the larvae can actually adhere and attach to the surface.
E-concrete has to offer its clients more than just ecological credentials. Over time, they've discovered that creating hospitable habitats for marine life adds another advantage, one that is surely hard to ignore.
We've seen evidence to the fact that the growth of the organisms on the concrete create kind of a layer of defense. Just the addition of weight, we can actually gain stability and strength over time.
This is let's say the unit when we put it in the water. And this is after a year in the water. And what you can see here is all the oysters are completely covering it. We designed the units so they can withstand the forces and perform in terms of structural performance, but they can also be a backbone for ecological enhancement.
The company tests its miniature designs in tanks full of real seawater, rocks, plants, and animal life from around the world.
What we're looking for is the accumulation of calcium carbonate on the surface of the concrete of different mixes and different designs. This is the process that we call biogenic buildup. So with time, we get a buildup of calcium carbonate that is sourced from marine organisms on the surface of the concrete. And we actually encapsulate the concrete with a natural rock. So when the organism die, in case of a coral, it will die, and then another coral will sit on it, and that's how a reef is growing.
The hope that our man-made structures could become stronger over time also means better economics. The units require less maintenance and could therefore stay in the water for longer. E-concrete, though, is just a few years old, so it needs more time to really quantify the longevity of its products. But the company are certain their products are better for the environment, and not just in terms of improving biodiversity.
We're kind of trying to offset some of that immense carbon footprint of the concrete industry.
Construction is responsible for about 11% of global carbon emissions. By adding a biological crust to their products, e-concrete prevents some CO2 from being released into the atmosphere.
For every kilogram of calcium carbonate being created by those marine organisms, we're offsetting 120 grams of CO2. So think about building a port infrastructure or a city waterfront that is an active carbon sink. I think that's a great advantage of the technology.
That does it for this week, but let's keep the conversation going on Twitter. Follow us at Climate. I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green.
Hello traders! As you can see, it's time to move our stop and profit for Japanese yen, and I'm going to move to 111,458. Sorry, 448. So if you follow my trade, please do so. If you copied this trade, we are in profit on Japanese yen. We're already £1,000 in profit. In your case, you're in profit, depends on how much you decided to invest. Okay, and good, well done. See, we did quite well with Japanese yen. All right, stay safe, and it's not the end, so we will pay close look to this pair, and we will see what's going to happen next. All right, so if it will move further up, we will increase our stop and profit. Okay? Okay, good. Well done, and I'll speak to you later, guys.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
We made it to Friday's eve, and of course, eve of that monthly jobs report. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week live from our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, streaming on YouTube. A headline crossing: OPEC Plus postponing its meeting to Friday as the deal is elusive. We know expectations of maybe some slight supply chain changes has definitely impacted the oil trade today. So we'll have more on that in just a moment. It is Thursday, July 1st, first day of the third quarter. Tim Stanovic, my co-host, is off this week. We're going to talk about the market because we're seeing some fresh intraday highs here, but only one major industry group in the S&P 500 is not joining that party. We'll get to that in just a moment. Coming up, we've got a CFO surrendering to authorities, Amex amping it up, robbing the Xbox vault, work shifting, 2 statues of Liberty, and Steinway going high-tech. Yep, that's Bloomberg Business Week on this Thursday. First up, though, let's get to that market trade and check in with Charlie Pellet.
Thank you very much. Happy Thursday. Happy first trading day of the second half. That is one packed show on this Thursday afternoon. Right to the numbers. I'm looking at a record on the S&P 500 index. Up again, up another 16, up 0.4%, extending the year-to-date gain to 14.8% as we begin the second half. Off of the highs of the day, but still up 16. We've got the Dow advancing 88, up 0.3. NASDAQ on the minus side. NASDAQ Composite Index down now by 20, a drop there of 0.1%. I'll give you the why in a moment. 10-year yield 1.47%, 10-year down 3/30 seconds. Gold up 0.2%, 17.72 the ounce, and crude pushing higher, up 1.8% right now. WTI 74.80 a barrel. We've got Brent. Look at the spread there, 75.44 for a barrel of Brent, the global benchmark. Brent right now, Brent is pushing higher by just about 1.1%. So it is an update with them, and again, repeating the OPEC headline, OPEC Plus postponing its meeting to Friday as delegates say a deal is elusive. WTI, West Texas Intermediate up 1.7%. First day out for Krispy Kreme, and again, investors are devouring that stock. Krispy Kreme surging now after moving lower initially. Krispy Kreme up right now by 15.5%. Lots going on. I'm Charlie Pellet. That Carol Master is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Last time you had a donut, Charlie?
Probably last night. Moving into an apartment. The wife had them picked up, and there we go. Krispy Kreme, as a matter of fact.
What a nice move by your wife. All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Let's get to the Market Drivers Report. Let's set the Business Week agenda on this Thursday. Dave Wilson with us, stocks editor at Bloomberg News, around the Interactive Brokers studio table here. Michael McKee, international economics and policy correspondent at Bloomberg News, on the phone from New York City. Dave, just quickly, want to add on to anything that Charlie mentioned when it comes to the market trade?
Well, I mean, you kind of captured what's happening here, or more to the point, what's not happening. You kind of have to look beyond the stock market today to see the real big news event, and that's the filing of Robinhood Markets for its initial public offering. It was finally disclosed today. It had been filed confidentially with U.S. regulators. And, you know, what jumps out, I mean, the company had a $1.4 billion loss in the first quarter. Thing is, though, that it reflected an adjustment made to the value of convertible notes and warrants. In other words, securities that had been sold previously. So you take that out of the equation, and Robinhood's profitable. And, you know, their revenue in the first quarter quadrupled from a year ago. No surprise, because that was when the meme stock phenomenon emerged, and Robinhood was at the forefront of that. You know, and one other thing that's interesting. You have, you know, two founders, and they're going to have super voting shares that will allow them to keep control. And then what they're selling is, you know, just one vote per share as opposed to 10. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, I mean, we hear that from the big tech companies, right?
We absolutely do. Yeah. And in fact, you know, you go through the prospectus and it raises the possibility there may be non-voting shares in the future. That would give them the exact same structure of their stock as Google's owner Alphabet. Which is telling you something right there.
Seen this movie before. Let's talk a little bit about the economy. There's some headlines crossing from the Philadelphia Fed President Patrick Harker saying he favors a slow, methodical tapering process, supports the start of tapering later this year. Looks like this is coming maybe in an interview with Dow Jones. Michael McKee is with us, watching all things economic and the Fed. How are you?
I'm good. You know, I don't have to make a decision, and I mean, I go with the news of the day being Krispy Kreme, since I don't trade stocks.
When's the last time you had a donut?
But that's a good question. I haven't had one in a while, but now I'm thinking about it because of all this. If I buy more donuts, it's good for the economy. Harker seems to be saying the same things that Rob Kaplan told us yesterday, and that a number of other members of the Open Market Committee are saying that the economy is expanding faster than we anticipated, so therefore we should consider tapering sooner than we anticipated, because of course you have to remember that tapering doesn't mean tightening.
Right.
You're still stimulating the economy as long as you're buying anything. They just don't need to buy as much. And Rob Kaplan was the first yesterday to say it should be this year that they start, and it looks like Pat is endorsing that. So maybe we're getting some momentum in that direction if the numbers keep up. Of course, big number tomorrow. See about it.
Dun, da, da, da. Monthly jobs report. Challenger read and weekly jobless. Give us any indication. I know weekly jobless is more current, correct?
Well, a weekly jobless is, but it's the thing about it is this was not the week that they took the jobs survey. So you go back to that week, and that week the jobless claims number went up. So that's a kind of a negative. And the other thing that happened today, we got the ISM hiring plans, and it went slightly negative, 49.9. The funny thing is that over the course of the day, the Bloomberg Consensus Survey has moved higher. We're now looking at 720,000 jobs as a forecast from the economists we talked to.
What's the sentiment or the psyche thinking that, especially after 2 months where the monthly jobs report from the government has missed the mark, right? So if we get an outperformance, will people all of a sudden, the rates market just really reprice because we haven't seen that? We've been disappointed rather than to the upside.
Yeah, I've always said if you get market advice from me, you're in big trouble. But the bond analysts that I have heard from today basically say that the dispersion of forecasts is so wide and the inability of anybody to really come up with a way to predict this is so great that anything within 400,000 to 1 million, anything in that range is probably not going to have much of an effect on the markets. Everybody's sort of going away until Jackson Hole when they think Jay Powell may reveal all. There is a Fed meeting at the end of July. So at one of those occasions, that'd be the repricing event, unless we get some huge move in inflation in between now and then.
Right, exactly. And let's not forget, even if we got like a really hot number like 1 million, we still have, 6 million to go, just to restore, as you say.
To restore, you've got about 7 or 8 million, and then you've got all the people who would have been hired.
Dave, what kind of number, though, the equity markets, if we get a hot number, would the equity markets potentially sell off?
Well, I mean, you certainly do have that potential, if only because, people are going to be looking at the figures with the idea in mind that at some point the Fed is going to change policy. And what is that point? How soon does it come? How soon does the discussion come about doing that? I mean, it's really been the focus for months now when it comes to the Fed. So, anything that might sort of tip the balance one way or the other would be noteworthy.
Let's all go get a donut, okay? I like
That's
glazed.
an idea.
Yeah.
I've stopped by Krispy Kreme in Penn Station a couple times on the way home lately.
Nice little snack on the way home. All right, we got to run. Dave, Mike, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Let's get to the Bloomberg Business Week Bite of the Day. One number that tells us a lot. Brought to you by GEP. GEP helps businesses transform supply chains with strategy, managed services, and AI-based cloud-native software. Learn more at GEP.com. Today's number, it is 30. Food giants, including JBS and McDonald's, committed to a 30% net reduction in the global warming impact of each unit of beef by 2030. The Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef putting that out. GRSB members will implement and incentivize greener trade, production, and processing methods, as well as expand R&D investment and other strategies, including carbon sequestration. And we know that meat production, there's a big carbon impact. So we are increasingly seeing food producers certainly look to tackle that. All right, you're listening to Bloomberg Business Week, just getting started on this Friday's Eve. Let's get a check on world and national news. For that, Nancy Lyons in our DC Bureau. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. Well, search and rescue teams are in a pause in Surfside, Florida, due to fears that what's left of a collapsed condo building might topple Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
There was issues with the remaining structure, and our state assets are being provided to Miami-Dade in terms of engineering know-how, so that they can look to see what their options are to handle this.
DeSantis says they'll be getting whatever resources are needed. It's been a week since the building collapsed in the early morning hours, killing at least 18. As many as 145 people remain unaccounted for. The president and first lady are in Surfside today, meeting first responders and the families affected by the tragedy. The Supreme Court has upheld voting restrictions in Arizona, a decision that could make it harder to challenge other voting measures. Bloomberg's Amy Morris has more from Washington.
Arizona had placed limits on who can return early ballots for another voter and the refusal to count ballots cast in the wrong precinct. The federal appeals court ruled the limits disproportionately affected Black, Hispanic, and Native American voters. But in a 6-3 vote, the Supreme Court reversed that ruling. Justice Samuel Alito, writing the state's interest in election integrity, justified the measures. Justice Elena Kagan wrote the dissent, saying the court was weakening the landmark voting rights law for the second time in 8 years. In Washington, I'm Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg surrendered to authorities this morning ahead of expected tax-related charges against him and former President Donald Trump's company. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar, and joining me is our own Charlie Pellet of Bloomberg News. Charlie, a couple stories that are COVID related or respiratory or virus related. One is by Dow Jones. This definitely caught my attention reading in this morning. Another respiratory virus is spreading as the U.S. gets back to pre-COVID-19 life. We're talking about a familiar respiratory virus finding a foothold in the U.S., and it's called respiratory syncytial virus, also known as RSV.
All right, and Dr. Pellet will explain that RSV is an easily transmissible virus, according to Dow Jones, that infects the respiratory tract. It is so common that nearly all children have a run-in with the virus by the age of 2, according to health authorities. Adults also catch and spread the virus as well, and people can get reinfected.
And what's interesting, like so many things, right? We've had these conversations around the newsroom, Charlie, how I didn't have a common cold. I was much healthier during the pandemic because I was social distancing and masks, and apparently infections of RSV and influenza, obviously, way down last season because of distancing and face mask wearing and hygiene measures to contain COVID-19. We kind of learned a lesson about how to kind of weigh those things in.
Indeed. Let's switch gears to what's happening in Africa in terms of COVID there. Africa bracing for a bad week, according to Bloomberg News. Lots going on there just in terms of the spread, and officials trying to get ahead of the curve there. That the latest from our virus update.
Yeah, rising so quickly in the African continent that it will soon face its worst week since the start of the pandemic. More infectious Delta variant becoming much more widespread. Sydney's Delta variant outbreak is proving difficult to bring under control, with 24 new locally acquired cases in the past 24 hours, despite Australia's most populous city being in lockdown for almost a week. We are trying to really gauge, Charlie, what this Delta variant ultimately will mean and the impact it will have on society.
Indeed, and today you had Boris Johnson in the UK coming out saying, quote, extra precautions could still be required. That after the July 19th date he has set for reopening.
All right, coming up, we're going to talk a little bit more about COVID, particularly for pregnant women and taking the vaccine. This is Bloomberg.
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Tape. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm Charlie Pellet. We begin with a developing story. Trump Organization Chief Financial Officer Alan Weisselberg is appearing in a New York City courtroom at this hour to face charges. The CFO surrendered to authorities to face state tax charges after a grand jury indicted him and his employer in the first criminal case against former President Trump's company. Stay with Bloomberg for the latest developments. Delegates say OPEC Plus has postponed a meeting to Friday as a deal proves to be elusive. Crude is advancing. West Texas Intermediate up 2%, $74.95 a barrel. Robinhood Markets has filed publicly for an IPO, and first day out for donut seller Krispy Kreme. Investors gobbling up that stock today. Shares higher now by about 14%. The new ticker DNUT. Walgreens Boots Alliance after earnings down 5.8%. S&P at a record up 17, up 0.4%. Strong economic reports adding fuel to the rotation into stocks that stand to benefit the most from a reopening. The Dow up 80, up 0.2%. NASDAQ moving lower, little change now, down less than 0.1%, down by 2 points. NASDAQ 100 index down 0.1%. 10-year yield 1.47%. Gold up 0.2, $17.73 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude again up 2%, $74.91 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thanks for the update. Well, we know that there's a bunch of headlines out there. Charlie and I talking about them earlier when it comes to COVID and the virus. Among them, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson warning that, quote, extra precautions might be needed even after the July 19th date he said will mark the end of the country's COVID restrictions. So we are watching a lot, and for what our guest is watching when it comes to the virus, let's bring in Dr. Ruth Karen. She's professor of international health and director of the Center for Immunization Research and founding director of the Johns Hopkins Vaccine Initiative at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, of course, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Dr. Karen joins us on the phone from Chevy Chase, Maryland. Dr. Karen, nice to have you here with us. I want to get into your focus, which is, I know, looking at pregnant women in general. Help me, though, make some sense of some of the conversations you all at Hopkins are having when it comes to the Delta variant.
So really nice to be with you, Carol.
Yeah.
We are following, of course, as is everybody, the progression of the Delta variant very carefully. It is here in our country, as in many countries around the world. And as I'm sure you've heard, we really do expect it to take over as the dominant strain in the coming weeks.
What does that mean when that takes over the dominant strain?
Well, meaning that it will, when people are infected with COVID, they will be infected with the Delta variant. And the reason that we're concerned about that is because we know that this virus is both more infectious than other strains of COVID that we've had before and more lethal. But the really important thing to know, and the good news in all of this, is that the vaccines that we have do offer protection against the Delta variant. So the best thing that we can do is to get as many people vaccinated as quickly as possible.
And that includes pregnant women. And I know that there's been some debate, throughout this process among those who are pregnant and trying to figure out what's the best and safest thing to do. Weigh in on this, if you would.
Yeah, so I'd like to say a couple of things about this. And I very much sympathize with pregnant people and with their providers, because one of the problems we have is that pregnant people were not included in trials of the COVID vaccines. There are some trials going on now. But so these individuals and their providers had to make decisions initially when there wasn't much data. We didn't know about the safety of these vaccines in pregnant individuals. That situation has largely changed. We are collecting data. We have been since January about the use of these vaccines in pregnant people. The CDC has maintained a registry of pregnant people who get the COVID vaccines, as do many other countries around the world. And so we have increasing evidence of the safety of these vaccines in pregnant individuals. It's also really important to know, and I think the CDC makes a good point about this, as do many others, that pregnant people are really at elevated risk of severe COVID disease and death compared to non-pregnant people of the same age. So it's really very important for people who are in positions of making decisions about whether to become vaccinated to understand that.
Well, and I also think what's really important in understanding, Dr. Karen, is understanding what this vaccine does. And I think there's been some misinformation out there about it changes genetic code, and help us. And I know I've done this, I've gone to doctors many times throughout the past year to understand exactly what's going on. And in later months, obviously, what this vaccine is all about. Can you explain it again, exactly what this vaccine does?
So these vaccines, whether they're the mRNA vaccines, the Moderna and the Pfizer-BioNTech, or the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, those are made a little bit differently, but they have the same end result, which is that they have your body produce the COVID-19 virus spike protein, and then your body makes antibodies to that spike protein, and that's what protects you against COVID-19. These are not vaccines that can integrate into your genetic material, change your genetics, or change the genetics of a fetus or a baby. These vaccines don't have any effect on fertility. So I think those are both important things for people to know.
Agreed, and I'm so glad you laid it out. Dr. Ruth Karen, Professor of International Health at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, joining us on the phone from Maryland. We do want to point out that Alan Weisselberg, the longtime chief financial officer of the Trump Organization, has pled not guilty to charges. He's been charged with grand larceny, second degree, and again, pleading not guilty. So this is just happening just moments ago. He was led into the courtroom, through the courtroom in handcuffs past reporters seated in the audience and to a defense table by about a dozen court officers. That happened about 2:22 Wall Street time, but just moments ago. We are also just getting confirmation that the charges against him, grand larceny, second degree, and again, Alan Weisselberg, longtime chief financial officer of the Trump Organization, pleading not guilty. We're going to dig a little bit more into these charges and what it means potentially against him and for the organization overall. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Carol Masser, and this is Bloomberg.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
So, Charlie, I know you like to travel. I know you are really good about credit card deals there where you get miles. Have you checked out this Amex Platinum card?
I was looking at that today, and just in a nutshell, because I got a lot of news to get to, but in a nutshell, Carol Nasser, I don't mind paying big bucks for a card if the deals are deals that I'm going to wind up using. So
Well,
I'll leave it at that.
Sally Bakewell is going to tell us of Bloomberg News whether or not what the deal is all about. So we'll get to that in just a moment. I know you're busy.
No, I'm just saying one pricey card, and you look at American Express
That's a lot of
shares
money.
today, they're up 1.2%, $650 if I recall for that new credit card from AXP. Here's what's going on. Do want to begin with a developing news story. We've got you covered here on Bloomberg Radio. Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg is appearing in a New York City courtroom to face charges. The longtime CFO surrendering to authorities and has pleaded not guilty to state tax charges after a grand jury indicted him and his employer in the first criminal case against former President Trump's company. S&P 500 index is up right now. We're looking at a record. We're also looking at the high of the day, first trading session of the new month and the new quarter and the second half of 2021. S&P up 19, now up 0.5%. For the year, up 14.9%. The Dow up by 100, up 0.3%. NASDAQ just turning positive, up by 7 now, a gain there of 0.1%. 10-year yield 1.47%. We do have gold up 0.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.3%, 75.18 a barrel on WTI. Delegates say OPEC Plus has postponed a meeting to tomorrow as a deal proves elusive. Robinhood Markets filing publicly for an IPO. S&P 500 index, as I mentioned, is moving higher, trading at a record up 0.5%. COVID news, a major concern for health experts has been the surge in the COVID Delta variant around the globe. Dr. Amber D'Souza is an infectious disease researcher at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health.
The more we allow an infectious disease to spread, we know it's going to mutate, and some of those mutations are going to be more transmissible. So this is within the sphere of what we've been dealing with in the pandemic so far. But if you imagine that the strains we were dealing with last year were infecting 2 or 3 people, and this one instead is infecting 4, 5, 6, 7 people, each infected person, we don't know exactly where we are there. It's just slightly worse, and it makes our battle against this just slightly harder.
And Dr. D'Souza is with the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, which is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Among some of the vaccine names that we track, Pfizer shares right now up by 1%. We've got its German partner BioNTech. ADRs there up 0.3%. ADRs of AstraZeneca up 0.9. Moderna up 0.1%. J&J Johnson & Johnson up 0.6. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, thank you so much, Charlie. As Charlie mentioned, shares of American Express, they're up about 1% in the Thursday trade. The company upping the ante to win more premium card customers, but yep, as Charlie mentioned, it's going to cost more. Here with what they are doing and exactly maybe why they're doing it, Bloomberg News finance team Sally Bakewell, she's in our Interactive Broker studio. So lay it out for us, what Amex is up to. We've kind of talked about it a little bit, but lay it out for us, Sally.
Well, I think companies are really starting to pull out all the stops again to lure customers to take on new credit cards after they retreated from some of these kinds of deals during the pandemic.
Because we weren't traveling, right? And Amex is known for its travel perks.
Exactly. Now the economy is reopening, travel is firing up, and folks are shopping and dining out. And Amex is adding a number of perks to its Platinum card. And let me tell you a bit about them. They include $200 in hotel credits and deals chartering private jets, which of course, you know, that's sort of exactly my jam there. And it's also branching out a bit from its typical dining and travel offerings. It's offering cardholders $20 a month to use for digital products like Audible, as well as $25 toward high-end gym Equinox. So yeah, they're having to be a bit more creative in a bid to keep their affluent customers, because of course, yeah, people haven't been able to travel during the pandemic, and so they've had to go a little bit beyond the normal travel and entertainment type offerings.
It feels like it's much more of a lifestyle card, or trying to become more of a lifestyle card. It's not just about people who are traveling to cool places. I mean, they kind of got a smackdown right during the pandemic, like a lot of cards, but nonetheless, it feels like they've been thinking about it differently.
Yeah, and it's spent months working on this card under the code name Project Pentagon, and it is going to cost you. Its annual fee is going up from $550 to $695. Credit card companies, they don't want to lose their best customers, so they pay a lot of money up front to acquire customers via advertising, via sign-up bonuses, and actually that can make the investment quite hard to recoup. There are analyst estimates out there that for the Chase Sapphire card, it took them some 5.5 years to make good on the investments they had to put in to lure customers, because of course that was in 2016 with 100,000 points as a sign-up bonus.
Well, and it's interesting. I'm thinking about the cost of it. I mean, almost $700. That's pretty steep in comparison to even some of the premium cards that are out there, right?
Yeah, I think most people, it's generally $500, right? Isn't it? Which
is a lot of money.
It's still a lot. And you get that in exchange for special access to airport lounges, extra rewards for travel and spending, and other perks. But given much of in the pandemic, yeah, they've had to come up with other ways to entice customers.
Sally, generally speaking, these bank cards or these, American Express, this is what they're all about, but I even think about some of the banks that have cards. How important are they as a revenue source? And I think about for American Express in particular, the platinum, the high end. I guess I'm assuming among their card members, they might have more green cards, right? American Express cards. I know the travel, like we at Bloomberg Travel, right? Like we have American Express. I mean, where do they make the most money? Is it the higher end cards? Is it the travel, the business travel?
Yeah, I think it's the premium, the higher end. And it's been tough for them. They've been in a bit of a bind because it does cost them so much to build up these high-end card offerings. And so that's why it's so important for them to retain their customers. But also, don't forget, they had to set aside, a lot of banks had to set aside, or card lenders had to set aside extra provisions to cover souring loans last year, which also pinched their profitability. So they were being confronted with some pretty tough forces there. But actually, still, that said, attrition levels weren't actually that high for premium cards at KPM, Citi, and Amex. So it does show that their efforts pay off to keep hold of those premium customers, the more affluent customers.
Right. The last thing they want to do is somebody like snipping up the card, cutting up the card, right?
Exactly.
I mean, because the longer you stay with it, and the more likely you are to use that card if you've got it in your wallet.
Yeah, it's a loyalty thing. For
Still
sure.
a lot of money, $700. Good to get the breakdown of what they're up to. Sally Bakewell, she's our finance team leader at Bloomberg News here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We mentioned, Charlie mentioning earlier, shares of Amex. They're just up almost 1% here at 166.84 a share. All right, coming up, folks, we're going to continue, of course, to track the market for you, but we're also going to take a look at the Bloomberg Big Take. It's in the heist issue of Bloomberg Business Week magazine. It has to do with robbing the Xbox vault. We'll get to that in just a moment. First up, back to World and National News and over to our 99.1 newsroom in the nation's capital and Nancy Lyons. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. Alan Weisselberg, the CFO of the Trump Organization, is in a Manhattan courtroom this afternoon, where he has pleaded not guilty to grand larceny in the second degree. That's a felony that includes a possible 15-year sentence. Bloomberg's Greg Farrell says it'll be interesting to see if Weisselberg will cooperate with investigators.
This will be a time for him to think about whether or not, he wants to cooperate with the DA's office, which is not, there's been no signals of that so far. And furthermore, there might be some exposure for family members, because a lot of the evidence that the DA's office have gotten has been benefits to one of Weisselberg's sons. So that's the type of thing that will, affect his thinking probably.
The Trump Organization has been charged with the scheme to defraud and has also pleaded not guilty. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is putting together the select committee that will be investigating the January 6th Capitol riot. Leading the panel will be Congressman Benny Thompson of Mississippi. And Pelosi has named Liz Cheney as the lone Republican member.
She has spoken very clearly about the committee, and that gives us great confidence that we'll be able to work in a nonpartisan way for the people.
Pelosi has picked 8 members of the 13-member committee. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos has invited 82-year-old Wally Funk to be a guest on his first crewed flight of his Blue Origin spacecraft. Funk is a female astronaut who trained as part of the Mercury 13 program but never had a chance to leave Earth. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
All right, Nan, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser, and joining me once again is Charlie Pellet. Charlie, Blackstone has been busy this past year. Well, let's talk about a couple of stories. There's one, should we do the serious one first?
Go for it.
All right, MGM Resorts International, in a 2-part move, acquired the other half of its massive city center project on the Las Vegas Strip from its partner and is selling 2 of the hotels to Blackstone Group for $3.89 billion.
Indeed, it's acquiring 50% of City Center from Infinity World for $2.13 billion. Infinity World, which you may not know, all are part of the Dubai government's Dubai World investment arm. The property, including debt, valued at $5.8 billion. Now, regular visitors to Las Vegas will definitely know these hotels. The sale includes the Aria and Vidara hotels, which MGM, by the way, will continue to manage.
And Blackstone, I mean, what are they going to get? MGM's going to be paying rent to Blackstone of $215 million annually after the transaction closes. Blackstone had previously bought a few other MGM properties, including the nearby Bellagio.
Indeed.
All right.
Very briefly, 2 quick notes. First of all, MGM, largest operator of casinos on the Strip, and it transitions MGM from a landowner to a company solely focused on casino management.
Come on. I want to get to Blackstone and Jay-Z.
Yeah, the real news.
Yeah, Blackstone Group agreed to buy Certified Collectibles Group, which grades and verifies items such as sports trading cards, stamps, and coins. This has been of interest. They're going to what? They're valuing the business at more than, what, $500 million?
$500 million. $500 million for certified collectible products, as you say, trading cards, stamps, and coins.
Right. And other investors in that company include Rock Nation, Jay-Z's entertainment company, Daryl Morey, the president of basketball operations for the Philadelphia 76ers. Certified Collectibles founder Mark Salzberg and CEO Stephen Eichenbaum will retain a significant minority stake.
Indeed, Blackstone living up to its name. It is the world's largest alternative investment firm.
They really do. Software, social gaming, defense, healthcare. They kind of just invest in everything. All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser, we're getting back to the heist issue.
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Trading day of the second half of 2021. We've got stocks surging right now. Another batch of strong economic reports adding fuel to the rotation into stocks that stand to benefit the most from a reopening. Tomorrow morning, by the way, we get the all-important jobs report, 8:30 a.m. Wall Street time. As always, coverage heading into that number, and of course, the kind of coverage and analysis and interviews you've come to expect over the years from Bloomberg Radio once that number breaks, 8:30 a.m. Wall Street time. Right to the numbers with the S&P up 21 right now. That is a record up 0.5%. We've got the Dow Jones Industrial Average up 114, up 0.3%. NASDAQ up 13 points, up 0.1%. NASDAQ 100 index also higher right now, lagging but higher, up by 3 points, up less than 0.1%. S&P as we begin the second half, up 14.9% so far this year. 10-year down 3/30 seconds, 10-year yield 1.47%, gold up 0.2, 17.74 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up another 2.1%, 75 handle on WTI 75.04. Also keeping an eye on Micron, it reported earnings last night. Micron Technology dropping 5.7%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. So this story, it's our Bloomberg Big Take today. It's also in the Heist issue of Bloomberg Business Week, which is hitting newsstands now online at Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg terminal. It's a story about robbing the Xbox vault. For more on this inside story of the $10 million gift card cheat. Yep, you heard right. Here it is. Let's get to Bloomberg Business Week features editor Max Chafkin. He is responsible for putting this Heist issue together. He's here in our Interactive Brokers studio. This issue, first of all, really is your baby. I know Joel created the idea a few years ago, but then he said, all right, Max, put it together.
Yeah, and it gets more and more fun every year. Every year I think, they're
Does it really?
Well, it's just, as you said, it's a whole issue dedicated to basically true crime, and it's our opportunity to try to give people some interesting, fun stuff to read on the beach. And as you said, one of the stories in the issue is about this crazy gift card scam. You sort of think of gift cards as being a 90s phenomenon, which of course they are, but they continue in various forms to power a lot of the commerce that happens, online. And this Microsoft contractor, this basically a junior engineer, discovered this loophole to basically print an unlimited number of gift cards for the Microsoft Xbox, which is their video game platform.
What's great about this is this Microsoft engineer was hired to find problems in the system, kind of, right?
He found a problem. He just did not report it. And it's funny, the writer Austin Carr gets into the investigation, and Microsoft initially thought this was some external hackers, maybe a really sophisticated operation. It turns out, I guess this is often the case with crime in general, but it turns out it's a much simpler scam. Basically, this guy was guessing his colleagues' passwords. There were other people on his team with passwords such as very secret 123 and things like that. So it's a nice reminder that you gotta remember your password security.
Make them a lot more complicated. Did it take a while though? I mean, well, first of all, in the process, he actually racked up a bunch of money, right?
Yeah, as you said, $10 million. The basic con worked like he got the gift cards, and then he would go on the internet. There are these websites, one of which is called Paxful, where people trade these things. It's just like another financial product, basically. And we talk about the way that which gift cards are kind of, you could think of them as a virtual currency, not unlike Bitcoin. So you can take these gift card codes, you can swap them for crypto, you can then basically launder your crypto, and then at the other end you've got cash, and he was using that to buy real estate, high-end vacations. And when the police caught up with him, it's one of my favorite details of the story, he had a list of his basically a shopping list, which included things like one yacht and seaplane, which it's just a fantastic detail.
He's just aspiring to these things illegally.
You got to have a seaplane.
Hey, just want to mention a headline Financial Times, Robinhood targeting a valuation of at least $40 billion in its IPO. We talked about that IPO earlier. I do wonder, Max, when you guys are going through and Austin's going through this process, I mean, it requires going through a lot of legal documents, right, to tell the tale?
Yeah. Austin, I think, went through, it says in the story, thousands of pages of documents, talking to basically investigators, people who are involved in the case. That's kind of the fun of a story like this, is where it's all sort of laid out there. And of course, prosecutors are, really good at telling a story, but often when that story gets buried in just reams and reams of documents, and also, a case gets sort of covered by the press early, like when it first happens, but then you kind of miss all these, really, wonderful and interesting details. And, I would be shocked if Austin is not getting calls from, Hollywood producers and things like that, because it does have the kind of stranger than fiction quality to it.
I feel like the whole magazine has a bunch of those cinematic those stories that would play so well on the big screen. I mean, this is what's interesting. It's not, fiction. This is reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think this story, first of all, it really makes you think about these digital currencies, because one of his big legal arguments in the case was that, hey, this isn't a crime because these things are not real. Microsoft is just making up these codes and then giving people free stuff.
It's not money.
But of course it is money, because he was able to buy stuff and Microsoft is then taking the loss for it. So it kind of challenges your sense of like what is money and that sort of thing.
When you look at the whole issue overall, the pandemic, I know the issue gets into, the magazine, the heist issue gets into that the pandemic was ripe for fraud.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or created situations that were ripe for fraud.
I mean, just a fun fact, the number of romance scams went way up during the pandemic.
What's a romance scam?
I think it's when you meet somebody on the internet and then they start asking you for money. But it makes sense, right? Because everyone is stuck at home. They had a lot more free time. They're maybe feeling, more vulnerable than normally.
Right.
And that obviously leaves us, vulnerable to scammers. And we saw a lot of that. The story, the issue has, a couple other kinds of pandemic related scams. But I do think it was a moment, in addition to the boom in, bread flour and yeast and things like that, there was a boom for fraud.
Listen, I had a phone call. They were so persistent. They're like, we work with your healthcare company, and you can actually get things like sunscreen and all these like consumer products that were, I guess, broadly considered healthcare types of products. And they had, I'm not stupid, I don't think I am, but I was like, oh, well, maybe that's a new thing that our healthcare plan is doing, before I realized when they were asking for all this information that if they were part of my healthcare plan, they should have had. There was a lot of things going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think,
Max didn't say I wasn't stupid. I just noticed that there was no backing me up. But that's okay. I still like you. Go ahead.
Do not give your personal information to random people who call you on the phone.
I didn't do that.
I think we're only probably beginning to reckon with all the ways that the pandemic, changed things and created weird opportunities. And this is certainly one. Another thing that, it's getting a lot of chatter, it's mentioned briefly here, is just, benefits fraud. Obviously, a lot of people were applying for government benefits. That creates a huge opportunity for scammers, and it goes on and on. Lots of, fake medical stuff as well.
Got a favorite story? Can you do that? Do you have a favorite child? I hope the reporters aren't listening.
So if you should read this Xbox story, and then you should also read this wonderful piece that we posted yesterday about an Instagram influencer. This was like a big time fashion guy. He was working with all the big brands, and he was also a really epic money launderer. And so it's a wonderful yarn that you should check out.
And you think ransomware is the big problem, but this story gets into, we only have a few seconds, gets into really what's the problem.
Yeah, they're called BEC scams.
Never heard of them before,
and this, if you work in an accounting department or stuff, you probably know about this. It's like the dumbest scam there is, but basically someone convinces you to wire money to the wrong place, and huge organizations fall for this.
That dude, by the way, has some great nicknames, but we're not going to give it away. You're going to have to go pick up the magazine, go online, or go on the Bloomberg. Max Chafkin, thank you so much. You put the magazine and that heist issue together. For those of you listening in New York, D.C., and San Francisco, watching on YouTube, Business Week's going to continue. If you're listening on Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, Bay State Business, that's coming up next. I'm Carol Masso. This is Bloomberg.
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
July 1st, the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, they're all advancing. S&P is at a record. Another batch of strong economic reports added fuel to the rotation into stocks that stand to benefit the most from a reopening. Almost every major group in the S&P 500 is advancing. Technology companies, though, underperforming. The benchmark gauge of U.S. equities up for a sixth straight day, heading toward its longest winning streak since February. Again, the S&P up 21, up 0.5, the Dow up 111, up 0.3%. NASDAQ up now by 12, a gain narrow 0.1%. American manufacturing continued to expand at a solid yet slightly slower pace in June, while a measure of prices paid for materials jumped to an almost 42-year high. As for the inflation outlook, Constance Hunter is chief economist at KPMG.
We're looking for 2.3% inflation this time next year, so we're expecting to dissipate, but we're still expecting pretty healthy inflation. With that said, we're also looking for a growth rate that's close to 5%. So when you combine these two things together, I think that we will see real wage growth, and the question is which segment of the labor market.
Constance Hunter of KPMG. Krispy Kreme jumped in its debut after opening below its IPO price. DNUT is the ticker on Krispy Kreme. Shares up now by 16.18%. Walgreens Boots Alliance shares slipping after the drugstore chain signaled earnings growth will slow. Shares of Warner of WBA, Walgreens Boots Alliance down now by 6.3%. Again, recapping, equities are higher with the S&P at a record up 22, up by 0.5%. 10-year yield 1.47%. Gold up 0.3. Crude, West Texas Intermediate up 2.1%. Charlotte Color, Bloomberg Radio.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
Well, the Trump Organization and its longtime CFO pleading not guilty to fraud and theft charges in the first criminal case to emerge from a years-long investigation of former President Donald Trump and his business dealings. Right next to me is our own Greg Farrell. He's been reading the court documents. He's an investigative reporter for the legal enforcement team here at Bloomberg News. He's right next to me in our Interactive Brokers studio. What do we need to know, Greg?
Well, we're still going through this indictment and all the charges filed against the CFO, Alan Weisselberg. There's no charges, of course, against Donald Trump, the person. There are several charges against the Trump Organization. But the key here, the focus is all on Weisselberg. And the focus is almost entirely on personal benefits that he received from the Trump Organization. And according to the indictment, that should have been counted as compensation, but were not. So they're hitting him with a number of tax violations. They're and books and records violations, and they're hitting the company with that as well. And it looks like maximum, if all these charges hold against him, he could face more than 15 years in jail. So that's a substantial number for anyone, but for someone who's 73 years old,
right?
That's significant. So we're still going through this. They've clearly done their homework on this part of it. But I think for people who are hoping to see that there would be some large takedown of the Trump Organization today, no, not at all.
But it's not also a simple tax case.
No, it's far more than a tax case. This looks to be just the first move by the DA's office to basically put a stake in the ground, and also to signal to Weisselberg that he has a choice here. No one's stating this overtly, but that if he decides to basically cooperate, to plead guilty to some of these charges and talk about other things he witnessed at the Trump Organization, then that would be a way of scaling back the severity of these charges and even, frankly, more seriously, protecting one of his sons, who is the recipient of some of this, unreported compensation as well.
And that's what's kind of interesting. I was going through our live blog. Alan Weisselberg's former daughter-in-law, Jennifer Weisselberg, spoke to investigators and talked about the perks that her ex-husband had received from the Trump Organization. This is important information.
This is important information, and actually the news about this broke in Bloomberg. Caleb Melby did a great feature back in November on these perks. He was able to get some of the documents from the divorce proceeding between Jennifer and Barry Weisselberg and put together that, this, great object of value, an apartment overlooking Central Park, had been basically gifted to Barry Weisselberg, somehow either through his father or through the Trump Organization for, most of their 13, 15-year marriage. And so, that had real tax ramifications. And I'm sure that caught the attention of the prosecutors at the DA's office.
I mean, is this ultimately, though, Greg, and I'm playing a little bit devil's advocate, is this a case, though, that Alan Weisselberg can come out and say, yep, okay, I got some perks. I'm going to pay for it. I'm going to take care of it. All right, maybe our books were a little bit wrong. We're going to fix it and make compensation, and it all goes away. I'm being simplistic, but I'm just saying, could it be fixed?
I think a lot of people will agree with that. Okay, like this is like a parking ticket, not a federal case, and that's a joke. It's not literally a federal case; it's a state case. But it shouldn't be. A lot of people would think a criminal case because the total amount of compensation allegedly underreported by Alan Weisselberg over a 15-year period is in the ballpark of $1.7 million. That's a lot, but divided by 15 or 16, it's actually not a huge number.
Right.
So, why are we threatening a guy with 20 years in jail for this? Unless, and it must be the case that the DA's office believes there's a lot more there on a business level in terms of dealing with banks and insurance companies and other entities. And, they want to, as I say, use this as a first step against Weisselberg.
I am always curious, too, about prosecutors when they decide to kind of start to show their hand in terms of timing. You and I were talking about this going in. What can we make of that? Should we assume that prosecutors do have a bunch of other information, maybe about potentially the president, members of his family? Like, how can we read anything into it about the timing when they finally decide, okay, we're going to file charges against a key individual?
Yes, I think.
But not Donald Trump or his family members.
Right. We have to assume, first of all, as they tend to say in these things, the investigation is ongoing. Right. They made that statement in court in the past hour.
And that's important.
And that is important. It's not like this was not the goal, is to get Alan Weisselberg for getting a free car for 10 years, a Mercedes, or not paying New York City taxes when he was, in fact, living on Riverside Drive. The goal here is the Trump Organization, and they must have much more info because they spent a year and a half battling Trump and eventually going to the Supreme Court twice before getting approval to secure his tax records and the records of the Trump Organization for 8 years. So they have this tremendous amount of information that no one else has had access to because Trump was very secretive about this before and then during his presidency. So, they must have suspicions or lines that they think are worth pursuing, but instead of spending another year or whatever trying to get there on their own, it seems like this is one approach they're taking, is to hit hard with someone in the middle of it. And this is a standard prosecutorial practice. Actually, you saw this with Robert Mueller and the Mueller investigation a few years ago. Paul Manafort, the campaign chair and a guy with lots of connections in Ukraine, Russia. And they went after him hard. They had to go to trial with him and get him in jail before he finally decided to cooperate and talk. And even then he lied. But fortunately for Manafort, he was able to get a pardon before Trump left office.
Just got about 30, 40 seconds left here. The next hearing is September 22nd. So what happens next? Or what are you going to be looking out for?
Well, over the next 3 months, or 2.5 months before this continues, there's going to be discovery on both sides. The defense lawyers, the Trump Organization's defense lawyers, and Weisselberg's will want to know more about what the DA's office has. At the same time, this will give Weisselberg some time to think about whether or not his chances are, can he beat this, or should he pursue some sort of alternative way rather than fighting this in court.
All right. Listen, you are a gem. It's one of the reasons I love this news organization. People like you who just know what's going on and can explain a story like no others. And I know you're cramming. Your team wants you back. So go run, and thank you so much. Greg Farrell, he's investigative reporter for the legal enforcement team at Bloomberg News here in our Interactive Brokers studio. Again, the headline, the Trump Organization and its longtime chief financial officer pleading not guilty to fraud and theft charges in the first criminal case to emerge from a years-long investigation of former President Donald Trump and his business dealings. We do want to get a broader picture of world and national news. For that, we turn things over to Nancy Lyons. She's in our D.C. studio. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol, you've been talking about it. Pleas of not guilty this afternoon to fraud and theft charges from the Trump administration, the Trump organization, rather, and its longtime chief financial officer. This is the first criminal case to emerge from a lengthy investigation into former President Trump's business dealings. Alan Weisselberg and lawyers for the company appeared in a lower Manhattan courtroom this afternoon for the arraignment on charges that include grand larceny and a scheme to defraud. The search and rescue effort is taking a pause at the Surfside condo collapse in South Florida due to the standing structure's instability. Miami-Dade Mayor Daniela Levine Cava says the operations were stopped early this morning.
We're doing everything we can to ensure that the safety of our first responders is paramount and to continue our search and rescue operation as soon as it is safe to do so.
Cava says no other recoveries have been made since yesterday. She stresses that the president's visit today is having no impact on what's happening at the site. The president and first lady are in Florida offering comfort to the community. Biden will be speaking later this afternoon. You can hear that live on Bloomberg Radio when it happens. The Select Committee to investigate the January 6th Capitol riot will include a Republican. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced the selection earlier today.
Congresswoman Liz Cheney of the Armed Services Committee has patriotically agreed to serve on the committee.
Cheney was the only one of two Republicans voting in favor of creating the 13-member committee. Pelosi says the chair will be the Democratic Congressman Benny Thompson of Mississippi. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Carol Masser in our Interactive Brokers studio. Once again, I'm going to reach out to our own Charlie Pellet of Bloomberg News. Did you get your bonus yet this year?
Let me tell you, if you head on over to Lazard or a lot of the other businesses, it looks like there's bonuses. The Help Wanted sign is up big time. And two critical stories, Carol, because this is right ahead of the jobs report tomorrow morning. Bottom line here, tight labor market.
Yeah, hiring bonuses catching on in the U.S. race to add workers. We are definitely seeing this, and this is according to the job seeker firm Indeed. In the week ending June 28th, 4.2% of Indeed job postings offered some kind of incentive beyond basic pay and benefits. That's more than double the share at the same time last year. Hey, come on, everybody. We know what's going on. Employers, as they are reopening, ramping back up, they need workers, and workers, some of them are still taking care of kids at home or members of their family, or they're nervous still about coming back to work. There's a shortage of workers. And so in order to incent workers to come in, I call it the Uber model, right? When there's no drivers around, all of a sudden it gets really expensive, and then the drivers come back in because they want to make more money. But that's basically what employers are doing. They're putting out bonuses, paying more in terms of wages, Charlie, and we're seeing that certainly in many different industries.
Indeed, and you know why they like paying bonuses?
Why?
That's a one-time payment.
Right, that's right. Not ongoing, not a recurring charge, right?
Exactly.
And there's also a great read, and you should check it out. Our Sonali Bosik and team catching up with Peter Orszag. He's over at Lazard. He said Lazard is, quote, very actively hiring even as competition for talent drives finance industry wages higher. There's a lot of competition for bankers right now. He said that in the interview. And yeah, we've seen that in the investment banking sector because it's been so busy.
Indeed. And one of the things, almost a mixed message, Carol, just in terms of hiring. One of the alleged benefits, you get to work from home or a flexible work schedule, which I thought was kind of interesting, not specifically at Lazard, but some of the other compensation stories I was reading today on the Bloomberg.
Exactly. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in terms of work shifting and what the incentives that are being putting out to workers. We're going to do that with the Senior VP and Chief People Officer for Waste Management. She's coming up in just a moment. Charlie Pellet, you're a champ. Thank you so much. This is Bloomberg Radio.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Lots going on today. Donuts, Robinhood, records for stocks, first day of the second half, and here to connect all of the dots and donuts as we head right over to the First Word Breaking News desk, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. U.S. stocks are grinding higher today with the Dow currently up 112 points. S&P has gained 21 and NASDAQ rises by 10. The U.S. 10-year yield at 1.47%. Gold is up 5. Bitcoin is down 3.8%. And transports rise 178. Among the main 11 SB sectors, energy and utilities led. Only consumer staples was in the red. And leaders to the upside on the Dow, Nike and Chevron, while Walgreens fell 6.5% after earnings and led to the downside. Regarding those IPOs you mentioned, a Krispy Kreme opened at $16.30, was priced at $17, and Robinhood targets a valuation of at least $40 billion for its IPO. In other news, Micron fell 6% after its numbers. And wrapping things up, Fed's Harker supports the start of tapering later this year. Live from the First Word Breaking News desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
We thank you very much, Bill, and to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg Time Squawk SQUAWK on your terminal. I'm Charlie Pellet. That, my friends, is Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much for that update. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. So earlier this week, I got a chance to moderate a Bloomberg panel on how we work, how leaders are leading and organizing for the future to make sure that they and their teams have what they need. All of this, we know, is impacting employers' relationship with employees, clients, customers, strategy, and really attracting new talent. The panel was sponsored by the Boston Consulting Group, BCG. One participant was Tamla Oates-Forney. She's Senior VP and Chief People Officer for Waste Management, a really great voice on this panel. She's kind enough to join me once again to talk about this topic. She is in Houston, Texas. Tamla, it is good to have you back with us. That panel, I learned a lot. I've been talking about it with some of my colleagues. We are kind of finding our way forward when it comes to what is work, what's the relationship between employees and employers. How do you all see it at Waste Management? And you were a company that your workers had to keep working when the pandemic hit because they had to be out there cleaning up after everyone, collecting garbage. It was a crucial service.
Absolutely. I will tell you that, and I heard you talking earlier before I joined about the competitive nature in the workforce, and we're seeing that. In fact, it was something that we were experiencing even prior to the pandemic. And so we were looking at ways to really augment and showcase the value of a WM job that far exceeded that of a take-home pay. And we recently launched this new program known as Your Tomorrow, where we're providing debt-free educational benefits for our employees. And beginning in January of 2022, it's going to be a benefit that's not only eligible for our employees, but their dependents as well, meaning their spouses and their children. And we think this is a creative and innovative and competitive way to, one, attract people to Waste Management, but not only attract them, but retain them.
Tamla, this is a big deal. Why did you do it? And can anybody access this and anybody's family access this?
So why did we do it? One, because there are a couple of things. One, our employees were asking about educational reimbursement benefit in its traditional sense. And so it's something that our employees were interested in. But when we looked at the old model, it was more of a reimbursement. So the burden was on the employee to find the school and university, and they would have to come out of pocket up front, and the company would pay for that. So we were looking at options for an educational benefit, and we discovered Guild Education, which has been a phenomenal partner for us. And with Guild Education, every employee that's a full-time employee at Waste Management is eligible for the benefit so long as they've completed 90 days of pre-employment. They have to go through a probationary period. But on their 91st day, this is yet another benefit that we offer. And through Guild, once they apply for the benefit, they get an education coach, right? And they will help them determine what opportunities are best aligned with their interests and also their career aspirations that's aligned with us at Waste Management. So once they come on, they are eligible for the benefit, and the next year their family members will be eligible for the benefit. And we looked at this for a couple different reasons. One, we know that we're going to have to reskill really fast, and we needed an educational partner that could help us upskill and reskill the workforce to be aligned with the changes that are happening in the workforce. So I would like to say we were proactive and we were ahead of COVID, but once COVID hit, it really just exacerbated the need. And this was a really good program that we're offering. We launched it in April of this year.
Well, and as you said, I mean, we saw this pre-pandemic, employers were beginning to fight for workers. You don't want to lose workers. It costs the company when that happens.
Absolutely. Absolutely. On average, if we look at our drivers and technicians, if you will, those are the ones that are most critical to our survival as a company, if you will. And we were seeing that on average, it's about $23,000 or more a year when we lose a driver. So we can't afford to do that. And you think about COVID and the demand for drivers and technicians have increased exponentially. You have companies big box stores that are, they have more customers, and more customers generate more products that they have to deliver and ship from different places. So they have to hire truck drivers. And so the demand has gone up, but the supply is somewhat dwindling. I'm the mother of 2 Gen Zs, and most Gen Zs are not thinking about a career driving a truck. And so what we're trying to do is bring them into our organization. We're looking at them not just for a job, but for the career. And our program is called Your Tomorrow because it talks about how we're planning and supporting you on having a career, not just for today, but for tomorrow. We have to have a way of getting them in. And this is something that is addressing a need that a lot of people have in terms of education, and we're solving that for them. And I think this is going to put us at a competitive advantage.
Tamla, as you know from the panel, we talked for an hour, and I could have talked for more hours, because several more, because there's so much to unpack. We just have about 40 seconds left here. Help me with the debate between workers staying at home, workers in the office. There feels like a disconnect. The financial sector really wants all the workers back in the office, but when I talk with the broader corporate America, it feels like it's a bit mixed. How do you think it's going to play out? And again, just got about 35 seconds. Sorry.
So, no, I think it's going to be a hybrid. I think it's going to be all of the above and not one or the other. I was on a panel with another panelist, and what they were saying, I was saying I'm in a talent war, and they said it's not a war any longer. The talent has won the war, which means that they have more say in terms of how they work. And so to the extent that companies can be flexible and adaptable to meet the needs of the workforce, that's what's going to make them an attractive employer of choice. So I think it's going to be all the above.
All right, great stuff. Thank you so much. Come back soon. Tamla Oates-Forney, she's Senior Vice President and Chief People Officer for Waste Management, joining us on the phone from Houston, Texas. And I'll later on kind of post the panel she was a member of, because it was just such great insight. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Carol Master. Coming up, we've got Dave Wilson. He's going to come back with his chart of the day.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
Yeah, this is Bloomberg Business Week, and we're just about 29 minutes away from the closing bell. In the meantime, coming up in just a moment is Dave Wilson and his chart of the day. Let's, though, get another check on the trading day. Let's head on over to Charlie Pellet. Hey, Charlie.
He's also got that song of the day coming up in just a moment with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all advancing right now. We're looking at records on the S&P, as I say, 28 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. First trading a day of the month of July, the third quarter, and the second half of 2021. Right to the numbers, we'll give you some color in a moment here. All the colors green with the S&P up now by 21, up 0.5%. We've got the Dow up 119, up 0.4. NASDAQ up 15, up 0.1%. S&P at a record. S&P this year up by 14.9%. 10-year yield 1.46%. Gold up 0.3, 17.75 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.7%, 74.75 per barrel. Brent global benchmark 75.36, up by 1%. Another batch of strong economic reports is adding fuel to the rotation into stocks that stand to benefit the most from a reopening. Almost every major group in the S&P 500 is advancing. Tech companies, though, are underperforming. Speaking of economic data, that all-important jobs report tomorrow morning, 8:30 a.m. Wall Street time. A major concern for health experts has been the surge in the COVID Delta variant around the globe. Dr. Amber D'Souza is an infectious disease researcher of the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health.
We are within grasp of herd immunity. We have made real progress. And, you know, people are continuing to get vaccinated every day, even though it's at a slowing rate. So if we continue, I think we can reach herd immunity later this summer or fall. In the U.S., we are still on track. Things have just slowed.
Dr. D'Souza with the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, which is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Among some of the vaccine names that we follow, Pfizer shares are up today by 0.8%. Its German partner BioNTech, the ADRs there, up 0.1%. AstraZeneca up 0.8. Moderna shares out of Massachusetts, specifically Cambridge, lower now by 0.1%. J&J Johnson & Johnson up 0.5%. Again, recapping, equities are advancing. S&P's at a record up 22. Best level of the day right now, up 0.5%. Bring on the song of the day. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Your wish is our command, Charlie Pellet. This is Bloomberg Radio.
So, you know, it's like shortly before 8 a.m. Wall Street time,
Yeah.
I present the chart, and then Tom Keene goes off into this whole thing about that song.
What did he say?
You can find out online. I posted a tweet to the Twitter page. I mean, he went through a dissection of the lyrics, you name it.
Tom Keene, when it comes to music, he too is a musician. Dare I say, former folk star?
You dare say that.
Dare say it. He did release a record.
Searching for Ward in June.
Nice job. Tom Keene, if you're
I have
listening. You do?
I do.
Is it good, Dave Wilson?
You think I've actually listened to it?
Ouch! Ouch, ouch, ouch. We love Tom Keene. I bet he had some great things to say about, about JT. All right, so talk about the song in your chart.
Bye, bye, bye. That's what's happened to the relationship between technology stocks and bond yields. You know, have you heard lately this school of thought that as yields go up, tech stocks are going to go down?
I'm not sure I totally understand it either.
Okay, well, here's the thing.
Okay.
It's a matter of the relationship between the two, which you can track with correlation. I mean, it's a statistical gauge. If you look over the last 20 years or so, you actually see that more often than not, bond yields, specifically the 10-year Treasury yield, and the S&P 500 Information Technology Index tended to move together.
Right.
But what's happened lately is that they've gone in the other direction. They're going separate ways. And you got to remember, yield, opposite direction of price for bonds, so that comes into play. But that's more like what you saw in the 90s during the dot-com era. And in fact, the negative correlation, in other words, now you're seeing tech stocks and bond yields kind of go their separate ways more than you have at any time since October 1997. And that was the middle of the dot-com boom when those stocks were just taking off whatever happened in the bond market. So, we're kind of back to that. If you're looking for echoes of that era, and certainly some people have been, given the magnitude of the gains that we've seen in the big tech companies, here you go.
So right now, okay, help me out. So what we're seeing is gains in tech, or no?
We're seeing tech move up, right?
And yields are low.
They are, and there was an increase in yields at one point, but they've kind of gone their own way.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. It's just that relationship over time has been disconnected from what it was. Now, correlations can move for any number of reasons in any number of ways. So it's not to say that this is going to last forever. It's just sort of evocative of the dot-com era. And if you want to know more, folks, send me an email. I'll get you the chart, the explanation that goes with it, and everything I do going forward. The email address is dwilson@bloomberg.net. That's dwilson@bloomberg.net.
Just quickly, because we want to get to your stock of the day, but why is it when it's a higher yield environment that the market, the equity market, tends to back off of those tech names? My guess would be that, okay, growth in the economy would be good for growth in tech stocks.
And it would be good for a whole bunch of stocks. Right? I mean, why do bond yields typically go up? Because the economy is doing better. If growth is easier to find, do you need to be in the fastest growing companies as much as you did before?
Okay.
I mean, think about what's happened in the past
spread
year.
out.
Exactly. That's why we saw the resurgence in value stocks, which has kind of tailed off lately.
Right.
But that's definitely part of the mix.
All right, good stuff. All right, I promised. Stock of the day.
Franklin Covey.
Oh,
The
I used to have a Franklin book years ago.
There
I know
you
they
go.
don't even do the books, I don't think, anymore.
Yeah, and then they focus more on business training seminars these days.
Yeah.
They came out with results for their fiscal third quarter, unexpected profit, sales beating analyst average estimate in the Bloomberg survey. They raised their full year earnings forecast, and out of that, you saw the shares, again, ticker FC, rise as much as 19.5% in today's trading, hit their highest price in more than a year and a half. And at the moment, they're up about 11.5%.
Do you know what they are up for the year?
A lot.
62%.
Yeah. There you go.
Their system is like you prioritize your work. I've done it, and it's pretty cool.
Right. And the idea is they have more options for running their seminars now because people can actually gather in a room.
Exactly. Makes a difference. Dave, that's a great one. Thank you so much. And your chart of the day. Dave's stock of the day, just after 4:15 on Facebook, LinkedIn, and on Twitter at @TheOneDave. Let's get back to World of Nat with Nancy Lyons. Hey, Nancy.
Hey, Carol. Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg is facing charges of grand larceny along with several other crimes, including conspiracy. He appeared for his arraignment this afternoon in Manhattan and entered a plea of not guilty. Prosecutors say over 15 years, Weisselberg avoided taxes of $1.7 million on various perks he received. But Bloomberg's Greg Farrell says Weisselberg is not the real target.
The goal here is the Trump Organization, and they must have much more info because they spent a year and a half battling Trump and eventually going to the Supreme Court twice before getting approval to secure his tax records and the records of the Trump Organization for 8 years. So they have like this tremendous amount of information that no one else has had access to.
Farrell says the indictment is expected to ramp up the pressure on Weisselberg to cooperate with prosecutors. President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden are in Florida today and have been meeting with first responders and families of the victims of the condo collapse in Surfside, Florida. The visit comes after search efforts were halted in the early morning hours due to structural concerns. Miami-Dade Fire Chief Alan Kaminsky.
The stop in operations was based on the subject matter experts of several on-site structural engineers. Concern assessments included 6 to 12 inches of movement in a large column hanging from the structure that could fall and cause damage to the support columns in the subterranean garage area.
Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
Thank you so much, Nancy, for that update. Charlie Pellet joining me once again. Charlie, we're going to probably have to kind of read this story straight as it is because it is among the most read and there are some interesting details. It is a story by Harry Wilson and Sri Natarajan, and it reads like this. It's about a banker's portrait of racism at HSBC prompting an internal probe. And here's how it reads. The uncomfortable conversations began the moment the 48-page report landed in senior managers' inboxes at HSBC Holdings last month. Soon attention turned to the unlikely author who was emailing it.
Indeed, a junior manager invited more than 100 colleagues to talk with him about diversity and racism at the firm, and then distilled their responses into a Wall Street-style presentation. And there was a list of pretty disturbing, very disturbing comments that showed up.
Yeah, here's some of it's a page. It ticks off a list of comments employees have endured. These are quotes. I just don't like you. I'm not allowed to tell you why. You've got all the right qualifications. You've done a great job. You're just not the right fit for the team. It's just a vibe. It's never been harder than right now being a white man in banking.
Indeed, and HSBC has ramped up efforts to improve. It has vowed to at least double the number of black staff in senior leadership roles by 2025. It's also committed to publishing data annually on ethnic representation and pay gaps in its workforce. And among other measures, its U.S. business is tying managers' performance ratings to progress on diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, the author of this was Ian Clark. He's still at the bank where he spent 15 years working in New York as a VP in a unit that helps companies hold and move their money according to people with knowledge of the situation. Officials at the firm have opened an internal review to take a deeper look into his findings and investigate the incidents he described. But Charlie, our listeners and our watchers on YouTube know this, that as we've done a bunch of reporting, diversity among Wall Street, it is something firms are looking at more closely because it's been lacking.
Indeed, and just on a side note here, under pressure from investors, stock exchanges, state governments, a growing number of America's largest companies are releasing diversity data about their boards.
Right. More transparency, more information is what everybody's kind of looking for. All right, Charlie, thank you so much. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
First trading day of the second half, first trading day of the third quarter. We've got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing, looking at a record here for the S&P, up 19, a gain of 0.5% off session highs. Gotta mention those year-to-date numbers. S&P so far this year up 14.9%. To put that in perspective, the Dow's up 13% year-to-date. NASDAQ in the year-to-date column up by 12.6%. NASDAQ up right now by 9, a gain of about 0.1%. The NASDAQ 100 index, full of those tech names, lower, little changed, underperforming, down 0.1%. The Dow up 96, up 0.3, and again, the NASDAQ composite index up by about 0.1%. 10-year yield 1.46%. Gold up 0.3%, just in time for the 4th of July holiday. 17.76 the ounce on the precious metal. Crude, West Texas Intermediate, big story there, up 1.9%. Did have a 75 handle, 74.86 right now. Important to point out that Brent, check the spread there, the global benchmark, 75.43, up by 1.1%. Investors are devouring Krispy Kreme donut shares today, soaring in their first day out, giving the donut chain a much-needed lift the day after it was forced to downsize its IPO. Krispy Kreme up right now 16%. Recapping S&P at a record of 0.4. I'm Charlie Pellecat. Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home?
Honey, please, I'll do the driving.
Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
Just drive, baby.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
Just about 10.5 minutes left in today's trading session. It's the first trading day of the third quarter, and we do see some gains, as Charlie mentioned, in the S&P and the Dow. Tech stocks, though, really lagging. Let's get to it. Count it down to the closing bell here with J.J. Kinahan, Chief Market Strategist at TD Ameritrade. He is with us once again on the phone from Chicago. J.J., how's it going?
Hey, Carol, good to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's nice to have you here. We're kind of tick-tocking down to the monthly jobs report tomorrow. We know that's a key metric, something that the Fed watches. How do you see it? How do you see it playing out in the markets potentially?
Well, obviously people are pretty optimistic going into it. I think that there's a couple of things you want to look for in the report tomorrow. The first thing, of course, is always the top line number. Is that matching up? But what I really want to look at tomorrow is where are the jobs being created? And one area I'm really going to focus in on is hospitality and leisure. You want to see that people are going back to, work in restaurants, work in bars, work in hotels, etc. Normally, when you're building employment, it's not a place you look for to build employment longer term. But in where we're at now in terms of recovery in cities and towns opening up everywhere, those are the jobs that seem to be where people are having the most trouble filling. So it would be great to see those jobs come back. With that, that may lead to a little bit of a disappointing wage number if we can outperform, because, again, those aren't jobs that normally pay as high as hourly wage that they rely on. So those are two of the main things I'm going to look for in tomorrow's report.
We are increasingly, though, hearing about wages, even for fast food workers, for those in the hospitality industry, that wages are being increased to entice workers to come back. Is that going to be problematic for companies when we get into earnings?
It may be, but what I would say is in the shorter term, not necessarily, because I think the bigger thing many companies are suffering from right now is the ability to serve their clients at the rate they're used to being served. So if you can increase sales, that's going to more than be offset by the wage increases. Now, of course, that's a very tough scale, let's face it, and I think that for the next year, that's going to be something that sort of plays out in real time for us as we get to see these earnings. The one thing it may lead to, Carol, is actually some of the bigger fast food chains, maybe they close some of the restaurants that aren't as efficient or making as much profit. So that would be the natural, I think, sort of derivative of this playing out if those expenses start to become too high.
Do you think we could see a rates market adjustment if for some reason we get a hotter than forecast monthly jobs report tomorrow, especially after the last 2 months have been disappointing?
You may see a slight one. I don't see this being just coming off a Fed meeting. I don't know that I necessarily see this being more than an important data point, unless there is an absolute huge miss or an absolute blowout number. I just don't see this as being that sort of number that sets us going crazy on rates one way or the other. To your point, though, there's so much going on. You know, on the lead-in, you guys talking about crude oil. Right. Obviously, that expense is one that hits people directly in the pocketbook very, very quickly, faster than any other commodity going up. So that combination may lead us to a problem in the fall, but I think people are so anxious to get out right now. Summer vacation plans have been made. People are not changing them, in my opinion, because they've had a few months to save money also in the short term. When we go back, when kids are back in school, when the normal, you know, I'll use air quotes on that, life returns, people are back at work, normal expenses.
Yeah.
That's when I think you may see the result of gasoline prices being higher start to affect the consumer. And that's when we have an opportunity where things could either lead to inflationary pressures or probably worse yet, a significant cutback in spending.
You guys at TD Ameritrade, you can see trends, flows. Where are investors, you know, increasingly allocating money? Where's the interesting hotspots in the equity markets?
What's been really interesting to me is to watch over the last 6 weeks or so is we've seen the NASDAQ stock, particularly the FANG stock, start to lead us higher. How Apple and Microsoft, you know, we had this dip in May and people came in to buy it. Those two particularly, but the FANG stocks in general, sort of leading the way. Those two I call out because what's interesting to me, Carol, is they get the buy the dip mentality, the trusted blue chip. If we go down, they'll outperform. But then on the upside, they get the great benefit of being viewed as growth stocks. And so with that, it's kind of a double whammy that every stock would love. So they started, and I think people are starting to trust more technology now outside that over the last couple of weeks. We're starting to see some of the chip makers, et cetera, come into favor. And, you know, the one stock that's been a consistent buy for our clients the last few months has been Ford. And,
really?
The reasons that it makes sense to me is we know that they're really good at distributing cars. They made a bigger commitment to electric vehicles. And let's face it, in terms of a pure price point, if you want to play it, you have a stock that's trading just under $15. So people can certainly afford it as part of their, at all account sizes, so to speak. There's a stock that's very affordable that's, proven that they can distribute the cars. Now it's in the F-150. I think there's a lot of excitement around the EV of the F-150.
It's wild because if I look at shares of Ford, JJ, it's up almost 70% so far this year. But as you mentioned, it's got a PE, whether it's forward-looking or current, of about 12, 13. So, as you say, still affordable. Where don't you want to be in this marketplace?
I think the toughest question right now is, I won't say you don't want to be there, but you have to be patient in financials. I just don't see this rate picture. The tug of war, in my opinion, between is inflation passing or is inflation here to stay? The tug of war is going to continue for a few months. So with that, I just don't see rates moving significantly one way or the other. So if you are going to be long financials, heading into earnings, knowing that some have already said that their trading revenues are going to be down, interest rates haven't necessarily done them a favor over the last quarter. That's one that it's going to test your patience if you buy it. Not saying that by the end of the year it won't turn out well. Right. But you just have to be aware of that as we head into earnings season.
Financials, by the way, everyone, your second best performing major industry group in the S&P 500, up about 25%. Energy, of course, atop that list at 45%. 20 seconds here, JJ. Got to be quick. Would you buy energy, though, even considering the run and the bounce back we've seen?
I think you have to watch crude. We're just at 75 right now. It should run into some resistance about $1 up from here between 76, 76.5. I think that's actually the key area for it to break out in those energy stocks to respond to the upside.
Gonna run. Hey, have a great holiday weekend. JJ Kinahan, he's Chief Market Strategist over at TD Ameritrade, joining us on the phone from Chicago. Just about 3.5 minutes left in today's trading session. We've got the S&P 500, a gain of just about 19 points at 4317. We've got the Dow Jones Industrial Average up 105 points at 34,607. And the NASDAQ, the laggard for the day, up about 10 points at 14,514. Coming up next, we're going to be joined by our TV team over at Bloomberg for Beyond the Bell, live on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg TV, and YouTube, counting you down to the closing bell.
Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
We are about 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Caroline Hyde, Taylor Riggs, Kaylee Lines in the hot seat today as we head towards that closing bell. To take us beyond that bell with a global simulcast, it is Carol Massa in the seat with Bloomberg Radio, and we're going to bring together Bloomberg TV, radio, and our YouTube audiences worldwide to pass through what's been a pretty lackluster trading day. But once again, S&P 500 up 0.5%. It is a new record.
Right, record after record after record. Although what's really noticeable today, everyone, is tech kind of taking a breather here. For a long part of the day, we saw among those major industry groups in the S&P 500, information technology being the only laggard. Now we see a little bit of a game and consumer staples lagging, but nonetheless, tech kind of Taylor left out of the party.
And, you know, Kaylee, really a note that stood out to me with the transportation index that's up 1.3% was Ned Davis, who I think just a few months ago loved those travel-related stocks. He came out today and said, you know what, some of this virus and the Delta variants is making us rethink this reopening trade, making us rethink, go neutral on some of those travel-related stocks. So I'm really keenly focused on the transports and really what this means for the reopening.
Yeah, we have to keep an eye on concerns around that Delta variant. So you have the Delta variant, you have possible inflationary concerns, central bank normalization, tapering, taxes coming down the pike, and maybe that is a reason, Caroline, while the markets seem calm on the surface, you are seeing people, as Taylor has so correctly pointed out, looking for downside protection, skew right around that record high.
Yeah, downside protection. Also, perhaps we're questioning how much breadth there is in this market nowadays, as we see fewer and fewer companies trading above their 100-day moving average. That's spelling perhaps a little bit of nervousness around these valuation levels. Despite the nervousness, we managed to crescendo up 22 points in the S&P 500. It is a new record high. It's 6 straight days. It is the longest winning streak that we've seen since February for the S&P 500. But the Dow also on the march higher, up 0.4% as that cyclical trade manages to have some more, well, oxygen in its lungs today on the back of that economic data coming in pretty strong. NASDAQ, it's your laggard, up by 18 points, up 0.1%. And let's look at where the Russell 2000 was, because definitely getting a boost from the value trade, up 0.8%, Carol.
Right, we now have the Dow up 13% for the year, the S&P up 15%, and the NASDAQ a gain of just under 13%. But did you guys notice Hertz all over the map today, out of bankruptcy? It was up almost 10% at its highs, down more than 2% at its lows, settling down about 1.5% on the day. But, you know, that original meme stock kind of having a volatile day at its first day of trading out of bankruptcy.
Well, and you really see some of those reopening, those reflationary trades back in vogue. Dare I say the transportation index, if we can include Hertz and maybe some of those cars, as we got some of those used car sales. Of course, those are up for our radio audience more than 1%, really led by energy and some of those durables that are up almost 2%. And for the radio audience on a sector level, it actually looks pretty broad-based. Because when we look at the worst performers, there are only 4. There's a lot of green on the screen for our worst performers. The worst performers are food and beverage. It's some of the auto companies. It's semiconductor and food and staples that are off anywhere from 0.1% to 1.5%, Carol. So you really do see some of this rotation perhaps maybe back into growth a little bit.
Energy continuing to be on fire. It's the best performing group of the year, and it was a top performer this year, playing out in names like Schlumberger and Occidental. You pick your name, and it was higher today. Schlumberger up 3.3% for the day. Occidental up about 5%. We did see oil prices, we know, going up, and this was on news that the OPEC in particular signaling a more gradual hike. Then we had Reuters coming out and saying that the OPEC was postponing its meeting until tomorrow because the deal was elusive, but nonetheless, we did see the equity names in the energy sector go up. Got to mention an IPO, a biotech IPO today. They're working on Alzheimer's treatment. We know this is pretty hot that. And we see it play out in the investment markets. Acumen Pharmaceuticals, ticker is ABOS. You saw that stock in its first day of trading up almost 26%. Price above its IPO range, and it also upsized its offering. Then I want to talk a little bit about travel stocks as the world continues to...
Okay, traders, as you can see, we closed position on Japanese yen right here. Great, well done. We made 1,000 pounds. Okay, guys. All of you guys who decided to follow this trade, who copied it, and you collected profit. And let's move on. It's end of the day, but some of the positions we will still be looking at until 10 o'clock UK time. So we still have all 55 minutes left. Money never sleeps. Okay. If you want to find out more about how we trade, if you're just new person right now, you can get the strategy from companyeye.co.uk. Okay. I will provide webinar middle of July. So if you're interested in, if you want to find out how to do arbitrage, how we trade, you can register for webinar, and I'll speak to you personally because it will be live webinar. I don't record webinars. And you can ask any questions you like. How to trade, how to choose broker, and what to trade, and so on. Okay, stay safe, guys. Have a nice evening, and let's move on. Let's see what other chances we can see. All I can see right now, British pound probably will move somewhere. So I'm keep an eye on this pair too. Okay, stay safe.
Look for a haven as we worry about the Delta variants. It's certainly a story of perhaps the Bank of England saying, look, we're not worried about the increasing inflation risks. We are still going to be there to support the economy. The British pound is your worst performing G10 currency against the US dollar, off by 0.5%. But the yen clashes lower, off by 0.4% as well. And the Canadian dollar. Interesting, the Canadian dollar is lower on a day when, well, oil is higher. All eyes on OPEC Plus as they delay that meeting into Friday to really decide where production goes. How much will they slowly build back production, having limited supply thus far? We saw WTI crude up 2%, almost above $75. We're at $70.96. But gas oil on the march higher as well. Heating oil, remember, it was this time yesterday, all our emergency alarms were going off that we're being asked to pull back on our energy usage. It's now cooled down here in New York, but we still have that overall focus on soft commodities as well, agriculture, as to how much the weather is plaguing the acreage being planted. And I leave you with sovereign bonds. Money moving into some of these havens as well. Japanese yields down, Swedish yields, Norwegian yields across the board. Taylor, a little bit of a search for safety.
It is a flattening of the yield curve kind of day, as you get a search for safety on the long end. I mean, we're down 2 basis points on the 30-year to a 207. That really catches my attention, but it's yields climbing on the short end. And Carol, this really kicks off our discussion of the ISM numbers that came in this morning. Prices paid the highest since 1979, but you have a Federal Reserve that says, forget about inflation, we're really focused on the labor market. So it is not prices paid, the highest since 1979, that we care about. It is a jobs day tomorrow that is going to really give us an idea, according to a lot of the reports, of whether we're going to get a taper, a hint of a taper, or not.
Well, and we got a hint of it in the ISM report. Their hiring plans number went slightly negative. That jobs report tomorrow is going to be really important. Will we see the rates market reprice itself, especially if we get a bit of a hot number? The last 2 months, they were disappointing. And so we're kind of setting up for that. So if we see an outperformance in that jobs number, do we start to think, okay, in terms of tapering or interest rates, does that calendar move up?
Yeah, and where we see the Fed discussion continue to be, all eyes on Jackson Hole, all eyes on when we could see their first move. It's interesting, though, that we do see these inflationary pressures. We were just talking about inflationary pressures building in about, if you want to be renting a car right now, Hertz. So interesting that they managed to be closing up the day some 23% as they escape bankruptcy. But Romain Bostic is on his way up to Boston right now for the Boston Pots. They're saying it was about $1,000 that he was being wanted to pay for like an SUV to get up there. He went for the cheapest one on the block.
You should have gone for the private jet. That would have been much
They're cheap, I heard.
cheaper.
Get on the Gulfstream.
Amex are offering them, right? Deals on if you've got your Amex Platinum.
Well, and here's the thing. It's expensive to rent the car, and it's even more expensive to fill up the tank. If you're doing a road trip for July 4th this weekend, it's really gonna cost you. We're looking at a gallon of gas now north of $3, the most expensive since all the way back in 2011. And consumers feel that, Taylor. Inflation, transitory, maybe,
Yes.
but right now.
You bring up a good point, and I've heard from a lot of economists on the street, and this is simplifying it. And for the viewers out there, I understand that this is a simple way, but inflation is effectively a tax on some of those low-income earners who feel the grocery bill that's up 16% on a year-over-year basis. And how much does the Federal Reserve start to, well, take that into account or not? Could also be a tax on some of the inflationary housing market, Carol, that we get when you have Bill Dudley out with an additional column this morning talking about the type of tapering. He's sort of on that path of they're not going to taper mortgage-backed securities first, despite the big housing market increases that we've seen, because we stick with the path that we've done in 2013, which is an equal weight taper.
Well, and they want to be careful about the housing market. You don't want dislocations, and so they're going to be probably very gentle in any kind of move that they are doing. And I just want to point out, you guys were talking about energy prices. We had J.J. Kinahan of TD Ameritrade, and he said when it comes to energy prices, that's one of the first things that hits consumers in the pocketbook. So we're going to watch for that impact. Having said that, people are driving to Tanglewood for the Boston Pops.
Nice segue there into what, of course, is where our own Romaine Bostick is headed right now. Remember, you've got to tune in July 4th, Romaine Bostick, Alex Steele at 8 p.m. Eastern on Sunday, July 4th. I'm going to maybe get my barbecue going, whether it'll be faux meat, real meat, I don't know. But it'll be interesting as to see what the inflationary pressures there are on my barbecue over the course of the weekend. But we'll all be celebrating.
It's expensive. It's getting expensive. All right, guys, thank you so much. We're going to do it for our cross-platform coverage, taking you to the closing bell on this Thursday. Join us again tomorrow, same time, same place.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
So wrapping up that Thursday trade, bouncing around as we mentioned, tech though really being left out of the trade today in a big way. Among those 11 major industry groups in the S&P 500, only one down was consumer staples, down about 0.3%. But energy, as crude shot up, expectations of some moves by OPEC, giving some support to the energy market. Energy really your outperformers among those equity names. Let's get a check on world and national news. For that, we head to D.C. and Nancy Lyons. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol, Donald Trump's company and its longtime financial chief were charged today in what a prosecutor called, quote, a sweeping and audacious tax fraud scheme. The indictment says Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg allegedly received more than $1.7 million in off-the-books compensation, including apartment rent, car payments, and school tuition. Susan Nicholas is an attorney for the Trump Organization.
We will win this case, but this case should have never been brought. It is a political prosecution. Political prosecutions where people are targeted criminally because the prosecutors disagree with their political beliefs happen in corrupt countries.
Nicholas calls the charges unprecedented. Both Weisselberg and the Trump Organization pleaded not guilty to the charges. Speaker Nancy Pelosi has appointed the members of the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the Capitol, including Republican Liz Cheney and Democrats who led the impeachment of Donald Trump.
The Speaker said the investigation would keep politics out of it.
As we observe the birth of our nation, we are committed to doing something that honors the vision of our founders, to make sure that this never happens again.
Committee member Zoe Lofgren.
What happened here? What caused a mob of Americans to think that they were somehow supporting the Constitution when they tried to disrupt the constitutional process? Who paid for it? How was it organized?
The Speaker said the probe would explore domestic terrorism at the heart of the mob attack. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. Now let's go to Charlie Pellet for a business flash.
Thank you very much, Nancy Lyons. It was an up day on Wall Street. That's putting it mildly. Another record for the S&P, up 22 points today, up 0.5%, bringing the year-to-date gain on the S&P to 15%. Almost every major group in the S&P 500 advanced. Technology companies underperformed. The benchmark gauge of American equities up for a sixth straight day, longest winning streak since February. The Dow up 131, up 0.4. NASDAQ up 18, up 0.1%. Again, the S&P up today by 22, closing at the best level of the session. Late spike there in the final couple of minutes of trading. S&P up 22, up 0.5. 10-year yield 1.46%. Gold up 0.3, $17.75 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.1%, $74.97 a barrel. Krispy Kreme soared in its first day out, giving the donut chain a much-needed lift the day after it was forced to downside its initial public offering. Krispy Kreme up today by 23%. Robinhood Markets makes it official, filing publicly for an IPO, disclosing it became profitable last year only to have its losses skyrocket in the first quarter. Its ticker, HOOD. Recapping, S&P at a record up 0.5%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. So the Statue of Liberty, you know it, of course. It's iconic. It was a gift from France to the United States. It made its way in pieces across the Atlantic. It arrived in New York Harbor back in June of 1885. So fast forward, nearly 140 years later, a second Statue of Liberty is stepping onto U.S. soil. It's smaller. Its trip over from France much easier, and just in time for the July 4th celebration of U.S. independence. Let's get the scoop on how this all happened and why from Jesse Brackenberry, President and CEO of the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island Foundation, joining us on the phone in New York City. Jesse, nice to have you here. Tell us about this and how this came to be.
Yeah, thanks so much, Carol.
Sure.
The statue has been on display in front of Canam, a museum in France, and it's on its way to the French ambassador's residence in D.C., and we are very happy to welcome it to Ellis Island for July 1st through 6th, a short visit, but here to celebrate with us for Independence Day.
How did it happen, though? How did we get a second one?
So this is from an original mold from the sculptor of the original statue. It's a 1/16th model, Bartoli, and they cast a number of these about 10 years ago. And so this one has been on display, and the idea was of the French ambassadors to the United States, and he's happy to have it at its residence, and we're happy to have a short stay in between.
Right, very symbolic of the relationship between the United States and France specifically, and it really goes back to the roots of this nation. Having said that, you really get a feel of the roots of this nation if you go to Ellis Island. I've been there. I've had family come through, but I've had family also come through Canada. But you get to Ellis Island, you go to the statue, and you really get a feel of what it was like many years ago and the trek and trip that many immigrants took to get to this country.
Yeah, absolutely. It is, I think, a really affecting place to visit. And it's a single ticket that gets you to both Liberty Island for a visit and to Ellis Island for a visit. And you can walk in the footsteps of the 12 million immigrants who came through the doors of Ellis Island between 1884 and 1954. And it's a pretty magical experience. And right now is a great time to go. Today, the observation deck at the pedestal was reopened for the first time post-pandemic. And the crowds are not yet fully back, and so you kind of have it to yourself a little bit.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because you know what things are serious when something like the Statue of Liberty gets shut down, right? Because it is open most of the time. If tourists are coming to the New York metro area, it's a must-see. And in a normal year, and this has been anything but, at least the past year has been anything but normal, it is crowded.
Absolutely. In a typical year, we would get 4.5 million visitors who would take a ferry out to the islands. And, you know, obviously the statue and Ellis were shut down for some time. And even now, levels are only approaching 50%. Now, this is the July 4th weekend, and it's always a big weekend. And with the Little Sister Statue of Liberty, we're really hopeful that people will come out now and make their plans to come for the rest of the year.
I was curious if the smaller statue, which from what I understand, is 10 feet tall, a 16th of her bigger sister's size. It is bronze, and so there are some similarities there. But I do wonder about, when people go there, remind everyone you can go in the statue, but when you go to Ellis Island, I mean, there's so much that you can see. It's very interactive.
Yeah, absolutely. Our foundation, the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island Foundation, worked on the original renovation of the statue and on the restoration of Ellis Island to open the museum that's there. And so both of these can be visited, and it really is very interactive. 2 summers ago, we built the new Statue of Liberty Museum, where you can see the original torch and an inspiring film that is not just about the building of the Statue of Liberty, but about what freedom has meant to us since.
Well, and I remember when it was restored. I mean, you talk about the original torch, because there was a point where the original statue, it was in trouble, and it really needed to have some serious restoration.
Absolutely. And so that work, through the generosity of the American people, was the statue was restored. And the original torch, the original vision was that it would have gold leaf on it. And that wasn't realized. And then over the years, holes were poked in it to create lighting. And that torch, because it wasn't originally designed for this, leaked and corroded and had to be removed. And in the 1986 restoration, they put up the gold leaf torch that we have now. But that original torch with its glowing interior is on display at the Statue of Liberty Museum now.
So what about kids and schools coming back, Jesse? I remember my daughter, that was they learned about, immigration, immigrants coming over, and they did kind of a mock, being immigrants and going through the process at their school, but they also visited Ellis Island. When do schools start coming back? What are you hearing on that front, which is a sign of the world getting back to normal, the U.S. getting back to normal, this city getting back to normal?
Yeah, I think we don't yet know. I mean, obviously that hasn't really happened in the last year and a half much at all. And, I think it's great as a parent myself that, we can expect kids back in schools in the fall. But how much the kids will be venturing out on field trips, we don't yet know. But yeah, I think that's a really special experience, and I hope we're able to rekindle it soon.
Jesse, you talk about the foundation specifically, which has been so crucial to keeping the Statue of Liberty as well as the Ellis Island going. You talk about the foundation. You oversee it. We've talked a lot about cultural institutions, art institution over the past year, struggling because people weren't going to them. How are you guys doing in terms of support?
Well, on the one hand, on the other hand. On the one hand...
It's always that way, right?
Yes. The donations to our nonprofit have been strong. I mean, the American people have always been inspired by and stepped up to support the Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island. And that was true through the pandemic as well. And I think, in a time that was very dark, these national symbols, liberty enlightening the world, is, inspired people to donate. On the other hand, visitorship was way, way down, and that's a meaningful source of revenue for us as well.
So remind me too, and I've done this where I've gone online and checked out Ellis Island records. For someone who is trying to track down their family history or find out if there were family members who went through Ellis Island, how can they do it? What can they do?
Yeah, we have a free database online of 65 million records where you can look up, you can search for someone who may have come through Ellis Island and try different spellings of their name, and then find the scanned documents of the original ship records and see their name. And if you care to, purchase sort of an archival copy, but doing that kind of ancestry research is obviously something that a lot of people are into, and I think interest in it really actually skyrocketed during the pandemic as people were at home and valuing family.
You saw that activity pick up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everywhere. Us and Ancestry.com and others that are, sort of in this space saw an increase in this interest as people were trapped at home and thinking about the value of family.
Yeah, no, I know. That was certainly on my mind. Hey, as we wrap up, just a reminder. So how long is the little sister of the Statue of Liberty? How long will it be on Ellis Island?
She will be there through July 6th. But the big sister will be there forever. And so we look forward to welcoming people back to there and to Ellis Island. And we have a family history center on Ellis Island where people can have the magical experience of searching for and finding their relatives in the place where they walked.
All right. Well, great to check in with you. Good luck with the summer season, and thanks for finding time for us. Jesse Brackenberry, President and CEO of the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island Foundation, joining us on the phone in New York City, as he mentioned, the mini Statue of Liberty, the smaller sister, I shouldn't say younger, on display at Ellis Island July 1st through the 6th. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. We are awaiting some comments from President Biden. He is in Miami meeting with families of victims from the collapse last week of a Florida condominium. When he begins speaking, we will take you there live to hear his comments. In the meantime, joining me once again is Charlie Pellet of Bloomberg News. And Charlie, Greg Storr of Bloomberg News, who covers the Supreme Court, putting out a story earlier. It's an important story.
Indeed. Now, Greg Storr not only covers the Supreme Court, covers the U.S. Supreme Court brilliantly, and he writes that an ideologically divided U.S. Supreme Court upheld 2 Arizona voting restrictions, limiting the reach of the Voting Rights Act in a decision that provides legal cover for Republicans as they push for new rules around the country ahead of the 2022 election. Key takeaway here, voting 6-3, the court said Arizona did not violate the landmark 1965 law with its criminal ban on what critics have called ballot harvesting.
Exactly. And the decision building on a 2013 Supreme Court ruling that wiped out part of the Voting Rights Act. In this new decision, the court's conservative majority restricted the use of a different provision known as Section 2 to challenge policies that make it harder for minorities to register and vote. And we've had lots of discussions here at Bloomberg about making sure that all Americans have equal access to voting, and we certainly saw sports teams and franchises and others really step up in the last presidential election, especially during the pandemic when it was just a difficult environment to make sure that there was as much access as possible for people to get out and vote.
And quick White House reaction, President Biden saying, quote, in a span of just 8 years, the court has now done severe damage to 2 of the most important provisions of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, a law that took years of struggle and strife to secure.
And we know Republican state lawmakers across the country have enacted dozens of new restrictions on voting this year, tightening deadlines, adding voter ID requirements, and targeting innovations used by large urban counties such as mobile voting centers. So, we're going to be watching this as it rolls out, Charlie. It's not going to be too long before we have midterm elections and then, of course, another round of presidential elections. And there are concerns about Americans being able to find the time or have the access, that there are polls near where they live so that they can easily get out there and vote.
And yes, Carol, there's also a corporate angle to all of this.
Mm-hmm.
While this decision does involve Arizona, let's talk for a moment about Georgia. There's a high-profile fight over a massive voting bill in Georgia. Major corporations such as American Airlines Group, Dell Technologies speaking up about a similar effort. Supreme Court ruling could affect a Justice Department lawsuit that challenges those changes there.
Yeah, listen, the corporate America has certainly been drawn into this fight, and we have seen CEOs, particularly in Atlanta, come out in support. Others who, have maybe taken a much more cautious stance in terms of getting involved. And it speaks to a broader conversation, Charlie, that's going on about the role of private corporations or publicly held corporations, the role that they have in some of these bigger societal problems, something that many CEOs have stepped up and spoken out in the past year, whether it's over racism, whether it's over unequal access to voting or health, a lot of issues.
Indeed, and it's tough for the corporations. You speak up and you catch flack. You don't speak up, you also catch flack.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Hey, Charlie, thank you so much. Really appreciate the assist and another important development on this Friday. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser in our Interactive Broker studio. Our next guest, well, the company, they've been making pianos for more than 150 years. And when you think of a grand piano, yeah, you're going to think of Steinway. Joining us right now to talk about the business, Steinway & Sons CEO Ron Losby. He is with us on the phone in New York City. Ron, it's nice to have you here. How are you?
I'm doing great, Carol. Wonderful to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here. Got to ask you, what's the last year been like?
You know, the last year has been fascinating. On March 13th of last year, when we closed our factories, I thought, how are we ever going to sell a piano in the world, frankly, if all of our showrooms and factories are closed? And for a couple of months, you know, it was pretty dire, but our teams got together and we reached out digitally in many unique and interesting ways that we're going to continue to reach out with. And actually, starting in June of last year, there was some momentum that continues to this very day. Last year was not a bad year for Steinway pianos. And if I was a betting man, I would have lost the bet.
Well, so explain that, unpack that a little bit, how it turned out to be. First of all, how did your team pivot to reach consumers or your clients?
We became much more adept at digital reach outs to people through the internet, through webinars, through our teacher base, through our institutions that we contacted. We were actually in contact more often with our main constituencies than we were when we weren't in a pandemic. And that created just a wonderful bond between educators and institutions and former customers and future customers. But I think the biggest issue for us, as far as I can tell, and I'm not an economist, is people were locked in their homes. So they were looking for things to do in their home. They weren't going out to eat. They weren't taking European vacations. They weren't doing so many of the things that they normally do. And I think they were just looking for things to enhance their life. And they actually had more disposable income in many cases because they weren't doing all their normal activities. And a Steinway piano has no negative stigma attached to it. It's only good. And with our new product, Spirio, it's a home entertainment system. So whether you play the piano or you've never played a note in your life, you can reveal the beauty of a Steinway piano in your home today.
Sounds like something.
That's something new.
Well, so talk to us about that, because there were a lot of firms and companies that were very creative and innovative over this past year. Who knew? There were new product announcements, new product reveals, and putting them out. Sounds like you guys were pretty innovative as well.
Well, you know, we have this wonderful legacy brand that everybody trusts. Steinway & Sons has been around for 168 years, and it's something that's going to continue to go on, hopefully, for many years. But we dragged the company into the 21st century in the last few years, and certainly last year, digitally, from an outreach standpoint, we really dragged the company forward in trying to access our customers. The Spirio technology I'm talking about is something we developed and really launched in 2015, but it came to its apex now.
Ron,
and it's something that does reveal the beauty of a Steinway for individuals.
Ron, forgive me. I do need to go to Florida. President Biden getting ready to make some remarks. Ron Losby, CEO of Steinway & Sons. Let's go to Miami, Florida. President Biden at the St. Regis Hotel, of course, talking to families of victims from that condominium collapse. Let's listen in.
From Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Mayor Gaba, they've all cooperated in ways that I haven't seen in a long time, and it's really a testament to how difficult things are down here, and it's what, quite frankly, we miss a lot. You know, we've all been working in tandem from the moment we got the news of the collapse of the building. And I think my colleagues will tell you we cut through the bureaucracy. The one order I gave the federal folks was no bureaucracy, just cut through it, get to whatever they need. That's why we decided to cover, for example, 100% of the search and rescue cost for the first 30 days. Not done often, but necessary here, in my view. And FEMA is going to provide temporary housing and other urgent needs for the survivors. State Department is expediting visas for family members from other countries, and there are from Latin America, South America, Europe, Israel. And I want to give a special shout out to the first responders, International Association of Firefighters, one of the best organizations in the country. And I particularly want to thank the president. Ed came down from Boston, and he's here with the entire group. You know, these folks are always showing up, no matter what. They're risking their lives. You know, there's that old expression, I know the press that travels with me is tired of hearing me saying, but I'm not tired of saying it. And that is that old expression, God made man, then he made a few firefighters. They're remarkable, remarkable people. They're always risking their lives to save lives, as well as the police and other first responders. I got to meet with a whole bunch of them. And we're able to deploy nearly 500 personnel, including 5 other search and rescue teams on the ground today here because of our FEMA director ordered it. I want to compliment FEMA, and I might add, all those folks are risking their lives to save lives, but also holding out hope that those will be found. Hope springs eternal. When I talked to those first responders, I pointed out that they're under a great deal of stress, and we should take advantage, they should take advantage of the mental health facilities that are going to be available, because, you know, we talk about our military suffering from post-traumatic stress. Well, seeing what they're seeing, doing what they're doing, understanding how much trauma is involved, I just don't want them thinking that they should walk away from help if it's needed. You know, they stand together, and it's really impressive. And there's also the need, in addition to state and local assistance, to determine the cause of this collapse and the adjacent buildings, how safe they are. There are 2 outstanding concerns. First, the remaining buildings may collapse. The remainder of the building may collapse. We need to determine if it's safe for first responders to return to the site to continue their rescue mission. That's being done right now, and that's why I asked the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NHTSA, to investigate to see if it's safe to go back and what caused the building to collapse in the first place. Because we're committed not only to recover, but to restore the safety across the board. But the other reason I came down was to meet with the families. The whole nation is mourning with these families. They see it every day on television. They're going through hell. And those who survived the collapse, as well as those who are missing loved ones. I realize I'm a little late because I spent a lot of time with the families, a whole lot of time. And I apologize for taking so long to get here, because I thought it was important to speak to every single person who wanted to speak to me. So after what you all covered when I opened up the meeting, I spent the remainder of the time, and such incredible people. I sat with one woman who had just lost her husband and her little baby boy. Didn't know what to do. I sat with another family that lost almost an entire family, cousins, brothers, sisters. And to watch them, and they're praying and pleading that, God, let there be a miracle. Let there be something happen for me that's good. Because I have, like many of you do, some idea what it's like to suffer that kind of loss. So many of them are suffering. You know, they had basic heart-wrenching questions. Will I be able to recover the body of my son or daughter, my husband, my cousin, my mom and dad? How can I have closure without being able to bury them if I don't get the body? What do I do? Jill and I wanted them to know that we're with them and the country's with them. Our message today is that we're here for you as one nation, as one nation. And that's the message we communicated. We'll be in touch with a lot of these families continuing through this process. But there is much more to be done. We're ready to do it. And again, I thank the governor. I thank my colleagues, Senator Scott and Senator Rubio. I thank Debbie Wasserman Schultz for their total, complete cooperation. There's no disagreement, no bickering. Everybody's in the same team. It's what America's all about. It's about pulling together, leaving nobody behind. And that's what made me feel, the one thing that made me feel good about this is the cohesion that exists. There's no Democrat or Republican out there. They're just people wanting to do the right thing for their fellow Americans. So may God bless the victims and their families, and may God protect our first responders. And I'll take a couple questions right now.
Mr. President, what were you told today about the likelihood, you said hope springs eternal, but that somebody will be able to be pulled out alive from this? And what were you able to convey to the families about that possibility?
Well, look, first of all, the families are very realistic. They know the longer it goes. And one of the things that the local FEMA personnel, as well as the local first responders, did is they took all of the families to the site to see what it looked like up close. And they're all realists. They all look and they see those floors just literally feet, cement upon cement upon cement. You know, when I talked to some of the families, some of the people who did escape, who survived, got out, they talked about watching the building collapse and watching as they're in the garage, one floor come down literally as a whole floor on top of another floor. They know that the chances are, as each day goes by, diminish slightly. But at a minimum, they want to recover the bodies. They want to recover the bodies. There's a lot of very religious people who are in there. Members of the rabbis in the Jewish community were talking about the need to make sure that they recover the body and be able to bury them, give them, and anyway. So I think they're very realistic, Mike. But I don't think that in any way suggests that it's we should stop. I think that we should move on, continue to try to recover the bodies. In the meantime, that's why NISTA and others are determining whether or not it's safe to send the first responders back. When they'd ask me about this, I'd point out that the last thing they would want and we would want is in the process of trying to recover, and the possibility, there's still a possibility someone could be alive, someone could still be breathing, someone could be there, that the last thing you want to have happen is have that building collapse and kill 10, 20, 30, 50 firefighters or wound them or first responders. So, but Mike, they're realistic. It just brought back so many memories. It's bad enough. It's bad enough to lose somebody. But the hard part, the really hard part, is to not know whether they're surviving or not. Just not have any idea. When the accident took my wife and my family, the hardest part was, were my boys going to get out? Are they going to make it? And not knowing. When you're flying home from Washington to get the news, you just don't know. So but I was amazed. As you know, unfortunately, I've done a lot of these circumstances where I've met with families who have had great loss. And what amazed me about this group of people was their resilience, their absolute commitment, their willingness to do whatever it took to find an answer. I walked away impressed by their strength. And Nancy Bloomberg, do you have a question?
Yeah.
I was told.
Oh, thank you. What did you learn, if anything, about the collapse of the building? Is there anything more you learned from investigators or the FEMA administrator?
No, it's underway. I don't, the director of FEMA is with me here. We don't have any firm proof of what's happened. There's all kinds of rational speculation about whether or not the rebars were rusted, whether or not the cement, whether it's limestone or not, whether or not. But a lot of the families who survived talked about how upset they were that in the last years that they've been here, how there was one condominium complex built across the street, and a road was purchased, and while they were living there, they would hear the drilling, and they feel their building moving and shaking. There are all kinds of discussions about whether or not they thought that water level rising, what impact it had. And interesting to me, I didn't raise it, but how many of the survivors and how many of the families talked about the impact of global warming, how much it, and they didn't know exactly, but they talked about sea levels rising and about how there were, and the combination of that and the concern about incoming storms, incoming tropical storms. And so, but I don't think there is at this point any definitive judgment as to why it collapsed and what can be done to prevent it from happening and what other buildings may have to be inspected to determine if they have the same problems. I'm supposed to head out and catch up with the governor, so I want to thank you all for taking the time.
Can we ask you about two matters away from where we are now? First is, while you've been speaking, a top associate of the former president has been in a New York court pleading not guilty to various financial charges. Do you have a reaction to that? And secondarily, if I can, does the Supreme Court's ruling today on an important voting rights decision add to the sense of urgency you feel about pursuing voting rights legislation at this time?
I know nothing about the first circumstance because I've been gone. I don't have any idea, so I'm not going to comment on that. And even if I did, I wouldn't comment on an ongoing case if it's an ongoing case. With regard to the second point, I think I did get a summary on the way down on the plane of the Supreme Court decision. It is mildly positive in the sense that there's a remedy available based on the particular voting decision. I think that it is critical that we make a distinction between voter suppression and suspension. The ability of a state legislative body to come along and vote, their legislature vote to change who is declared the winner, I find to be somewhat astounding. But the Supreme Court did not rule that way today, to the best of my knowledge. And but I'll have much more to say about that because I plan on speaking extensively on voting rights and as well as going on the road on this issue. So thank you all very much.
All right, that's President Biden. He is at the St. Regis, or has been, hotel in Miami, met with families of victims from the collapse last week of a Florida condominium, the 12-story Champlain Towers South in Miami, pledging specifically federal assistance, comforting those grieving families, and as I mentioned, offering enhanced federal support to the recovery from the collapse of that condominium tower in Surfside, Florida, one of the deadliest U.S. disasters of his president. The president saying, I think there's more that we can do. He said that during a meeting with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Miami-Dade County Governor Daniela Levine, Cava, and other public officials. The president said the U.S. could possibly pay for all of the rescue efforts. And as we know, the president whose personal experience with tragedy has really marked his political career. So certainly feeling the family's grief there. Also answering a few questions about that Supreme Court ruling when it comes to voting rights. He says he'll have more to say, says remedies available for the top court when it comes to the voting rights ruling. So stay tuned for more of that. All right, you are listening to Bloomberg Business Week on this Thursday, July 1st. Let's get another check on some of your top business stories. A look at how the markets closed on this Thursday. Here is Charlie Pellet.
Thank you very much, Carol Massar. July 1st, yes, start of the second half of 2021, right to the numbers. A record for the S&P today. S&P advancing again, up another 22 points, now at 43.19, up 0.5% for the year, up by 15%. The Dow up 131 points today, up 0.4%. NASDAQ up 18, a gain there of 0.1%. However, the NASDAQ Composite Index, or I should say the NASDAQ 100 Index underperformed. It was up barely, up by 0.04%. 10-year yield, 1.45%. Gold up 0.4%, $17.76 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up by 2%, $74.92 a barrel. Stocks rallying right into the closing bell. This ahead of tomorrow morning's all-important jobs report. Complete coverage as that number breaks, 8:30 a.m. Wall Street time. And, of course, coverage heading into the report tomorrow right here on Bloomberg Radio and on Bloomberg Television. The why behind the rally today, another batch of strong economic reports, adding fuel to the rotation into stocks that do stand to benefit the most from a U.S. reopening. Recapping, S&P at a record up 0.5%. Briefly, Krispy Kreme jumping in its trading debut today after a downsized IPO. Today we saw Krispy Kreme up by 23%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That, Carol, is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, we are up to speed. Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. Well, one of the stories that we certainly have talked about, Charlie has talked about it as well. Robinhood Markets filing publicly for an initial public offering, disclosing it became profitable last year, only to have its losses skyrocket in the first quarter. Let's get to it with our Bloomberg News investing reporter, Annie Massa. So, Annie, what do we need to know about this?
So this is the first very clear look that we've had into Robinhood's financials so far. So we saw just kind of in dollar terms for the first time how the run-up in stock trading and also cryptocurrency has contributed to Robinhood over the past year or so. So you saw Robinhood's revenue reach about $1 billion last year. That's more than triple the year earlier.
I mean, this is when we start to get a peek into the company's business, right?
Exactly. And one of the most stark things that stood out in this filing was some of the risks that Robinhood sees for its business going forward. And this really comes down to some of the debates that we've been having over Robinhood and that have been happening with lawmakers and regulators for the past couple of months. But they mentioned some of those issues with the company's business model and how it's perceived in Washington, and how new regulations and any additional scrutiny could pose a risk to it in the future.
Right. You do wonder, it has been an abnormal environment, to say the least, over the past year. During the pandemic, a lot of people home, they could trade. A lot of individual investors, retail investors, that's exactly what they were doing, and that benefited Robinhood in a big way. You do wonder, what's life like on the other side of this?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I mean, part of this comes down to timing. Robinhood was able to show that it was profitable last year. It achieved profitability of about of over $7 million. And, it's able to show that it's growing and that its, headcount is growing. It's got 18 million monthly active users on the platform. So it's able to show some positive growth. And, it looks like the company is trying to seize on this moment to go public when people are really talking about it, really signing up for the app, and it's top of mind, even though it has some of these regulatory issues kind of swirling in the background.
Exactly. I always love the timing when somebody goes public. I'm looking at the environment and if they are just seizing an opportunity to get out there. Because let's not forget, right? We've been talking this week, too, about that $70 million fine that FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, imposed just yesterday. That was a record fine for FINRA.
That's right. And FINRA accused Robinhood of some pretty major misdeeds. It basically said that Robinhood had kind of some sweeping infractions over a period of years, including FINRA alleges misleading customers, including allegations of not having the right controls in place for its own technology. We all remember the big outages that Robinhood had in March 2020 when volatility was spiking. So FINRA for sure is trying to send a message with that record fine that it's watching what Robinhood is doing in the brokerage space.
The other thing that's interesting about this, Annie, and Dave Wilson was pointing it out earlier, our Bloomberg Stocks columnist and editor, Dave Wilson, that the structure of its classes of stock is very much like some of the uber tech companies that are out there, that in many ways, the voting or the more powerful voting structure is kept in the hands of the creators.
Yes, that's right. So the two co-founders, Vlad Tenev and Beju Bhatt, they very much align with the kind of typical Silicon Valley, keeping that control of ownership in the company. And, that's borne out here in the Robinhood filing as well.
And the other thing in the filing is, they're going to open this up to individual investors in a big way.
That's right. That was kind of stark to see. Robinhood is setting aside between 20 and 35% of its shares in this IPO for its own retail investors, and that's an unusually high slice to set aside. But I think in doing that, it's trying to show, hey, we're a company that's about the little guy and about small-time investors. And early access to pre-IPO shares wouldn't be something that investors typically get.
And I think it's safe to think that people who are using the platform, who think it's great that Robinhood is disrupting the investment world, would maybe want to partake in the IPO. Having said that, Annie, as investing reporter here at Bloomberg, you look at the investment space, the big guys like the BlackRocks that are out there, and then also the upstarts like a Robinhood. How nervous are some of the more established trading firms that are out there, or investment firms, about a Robinhood and maybe similar firms like them?
Sure. Everyone in the market took note of what happened in January, and looking through this S1, Robinhood has that meme stock kind of saga that we saw really top of mind, and it even mentions that it kind of winkingly refers to the fact that Robinhood itself could become a meme stock, aka a lot of investors could buy shares and not necessarily hold them long term. It mentions the run up in Dogecoin and how that made up more than a third of crypto revenue in the first quarter. So there are these kind of references to all of the kind of frothy speculative behavior we've been seeing in the past year and a half, and how that might loom over Robinhood. So not only is Robinhood thinking about it, and not only is Robinhood's investor base thinking about it, but you also have the more established players and Wall Street institutions, I think, grappling with the meme stock frenzy itself as well.
Do you feel like, or at least from your reporting and what you're hearing, that regulators are still trying to get up to speed on how things are changing? I always do feel like there's a fair amount of lag, especially when there's new platforms, new ways of doing something in contrast to the establishment. And I think it's safe to say the investment world is going through that. Regulators still trying to figure it all out.
Yes, that's right. So even though that $70 million FINRA fine is now behind Robinhood, it had a litany of legal challenges that are still in the works. That includes some things that hadn't been revealed before, including that the U.S. Regulators seized Vlad Tenev's phone this past year. New York might have its own penalties for lapses, it says, in money laundering related matters. So there's a lot of potential for more litigation and more regulatory changes even coming down the pipeline.
It's certainly been an interesting year. Hey, do we have any timeline for this Robinhood IPO?
Since this S1 is now public, we should probably expect it in the coming weeks.
Okay, and what's been already a pretty hot IPO market. Annie Massa, thank you so much. Everything we needed to know about Robinhood market, certainly among our most read stories on the Bloomberg today. Again, Robinhood filing for an IPO, and we will continue to see more information about that. Annie, thanks so much. Bloomberg News investing reporter Annie Massa. Coming up next is Sound On with host Joe Matthew. And Joe, I feel like you have a lot of stuff to talk about today.
What? It's just all these days just keep coming. And of course, we're live in Washington, Carol, but we're going to start in Surfside. You just brought the speech to us, and boy, what a tough situation this is. It's hard to really even talk about it, and we're not trying to get political here, but this is part of the job of being the president, the consoler-in-chief. And as you just heard, it's something that Joe Biden happens to be pretty good at. We're going to talk about his day coming up with Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick and Jeannie. And of course, we've got SCOTUS rulings today and this major agreement. Yeah. My gosh, 130 countries on a minimum corporate tax, and we're just getting started.
Yeah, see, actually, people can figure things out together. There can be global coordination. Go figure.
Isn't that something?
All right, have a good show. Joe Matthew coming your way with Sound On in just a moment, just a few minutes' time. Recapping how the markets closed on this Thursday, the Dow Jones Industrial Average up 131 points, up almost 0.4%. S&P 500 a gain of about 0.5%, up 22 points. And the NASDAQ a gain of 18 points, just up 0.1%. Keep in mind, we're all kind of counting down to that monthly jobs report. We'll get that at 8:30 a.m. Wall Street time. Certainly a very key metric and something we know the Fed is watching, and whether or not that gives us some indication about the trajectory of interest rates and easing off of that balance sheet. For the whole Bloomberg Business Week team, I'm Carol Massar. Have a good and safe evening. This is Bloomberg.